Let's see here. Okay. We are live. I think we're live. Let's see if we're live. We are live. There I am. All right, so we'll get started here in about 10 minutes, it looks like. Back again, quick time. What's up, man? How you doing? Let's see here. Trying to see if I can get the YouTube stream on my live stream. Luis from Union, New Jersey. Nice. Good to see you, Luis. Hope you're doing well. Get rolling here in just a few minutes. I'm not sure if I've ever been to Union, New Jersey. I've definitely been to Jersey a few times, but I'm not sure if I've been to Union or not. Union in South Jersey or North Jersey, I wonder. Oh, thank you, John. Appreciate you saying that, man. Let's see. Need to get things ready here. Oh, yeah. There we go. North Jersey. Nice. Once more into the fray. That's exactly right, Randy. Hope you're doing well, sir. Talking a little code here on a Sunday afternoon. Should be fun. I was sick all last week. Feel fine now, but my throat is still a little bit jacked up, so I'm going to be chewing on some cough drops, I think. And now I gave it to my wife because my family believes in sharing, so now she's sick. Let's see, looks like the stream is good. Not dropping frames. I'm guessing that you guys can hear me. I haven't heard anything otherwise, so thinking that's probably a good sign. So it will normally look like this. I got that one going, that one. The code cam and the live chat. Perfect. Let's see if I did that. Perfect. All right, good, good, good. I can see you guys. You guys can see me. All right, 5 minutes and we're going to get started. Chuck, you like that code cam? I know. Man, I was up all night trying to think of a name for the code cam. David Engelhardt is here. Nice. Good to see you, David. Chuck Burkhardt, no big deal, only the Instructor of the Year in, I can't remember what facility, but yeah, Chuck is the man. Chuck is the man with the code CAM. Better switch over to the code cam again. Look at that code cam, yo. Man. Kidding me? Look at that code cam. Barry Yeslow in the house. My man from PA. I think I'm going to be in Lancaster. In, what is, today's August? August, September, October. I think I'm going to be in October in Lancaster. Did I just say I'm going to be in October in Lancaster? Kind of switch those words around, and I think you'll get the story there. Now, if you can talk the school into issuing students code books, yeah, that's always hard. Code books is kind of a big deal, you know. Can't always be relying on the code cam. Let's see. Got 16 people here right now. If you're out there, you want to say hi, that would be cool. You certainly don't have to. David, you're down in Florida. Chuck, you're in PA, right? You're not in Jersey. I think you're in PA, aren't you? I know Barry's in PA. I'm not sure where Randy is. Luis is in North Jersey. I'm not sure where John is. Or QuickTime. I'm not sure who QuickTime is, but good to see you back. Carlos Ramirez from Arizona. Yeah, okay, I knew you were in PA. Yeah, you teach in Jersey, but you're in PA. Okay, got it. Nice. Buckeye, Arizona. Haven't been to Buckeye. Been to Phoenix and Flagstaff and a lot of places in Arizona, but not Buckeye. So yeah, everybody. Chuck works at a power plant in Pennsylvania, and it is the craziest thing because Chuck, you guys take recyclables and convert them into electrical energy, and the amount of fly ash that's created. Your facility is what, like 5 years old and looks like it's like a Roman ruin, just from the corrosion inside the building. I've never seen anything like it. It's pretty amazing. Max from Atlanta, Georgia, outstanding. Antonio from Cali. Joe Bellantoni. Joe, I think you're from, are you from Mass? Or you're from New Hampshire, I think. Joe Ballard from Indiana. Chris Folan from Colorado. Okay, so Chuck, it's not recyclables, it's just garbage. Got it, okay. Okay, for some reason I was thinking it was your shirt that you gave me said something about recyclables. That's where I was off. Couple more minutes and we'll get rolling. Felix from Colombia, and that is not Columbia, South Dakota. That is Columbia, Central America. Good to see you, my friend. Joe, you are New Hampshire. Outstanding. Mitchell from Michigan, getting ready to take the journeyman test. Nice. Well, stick with me. I think this is going to be very beneficial for you, Mitchell. And best of luck to that journeyman test, man. And reach out. Let us know how you did. You know, once you're done with it, if we have the chance, tell us that you passed, man. Is it South America? Oh, I knew that. I'm an idiot. It's not Central America. Colombia is down in the northwest of South America by Peru, just north of Peru and Ecuador. I knew that. I don't know why I said, yeah. Devin, Knoxville, Tennessee. Very cool. Very cool. Alfredo Ruiz from California. Good to see you, Alfredo. Just on the border with Central America. Okay, nice. Sean from Vero Beach, Florida, prepping for the Masters. Good. And you got your neighbor from Cape Canaveral. Outstanding. Got to get you a site visit to the plant. Chuck, I would love to go see the plant. In fact, when I'm in Lancaster, how far is Lancaster from where you're at? I don't know where Lancaster is. I was in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago, and I've been to Philly and that area, but I don't know where Lancaster is. So if I'm close, let me know, and I would love to visit the plant. That'd be out of sight. About 2 hours away. I think we can probably swing that. I think we could make that work. Figure out how to fly into Lancaster, head over to your place, and then fly back out of Philly, maybe? We can make that work. That'll be cool. Spend an extra day and go to the plant. All right. We got 34 people in the house. It is 2:01 my time. So, with that said, I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. So, let me get that distraction out of the way. I will try to keep up with reading the chat board as I can, but obviously I can't do everything all at the same time. So I'll check it whenever I can, and I'll minimize that. And let's see, get my laser pointer out, and I think we're ready to go. All right, so we're going to cover kind of a quick little history of the NEC, but we're mainly going to focus on application of the National Electrical Code, and it's going to be based on the 2020 NEC because obviously we change it every 3 years, and some of this stuff might change in 2023. In fact, the definitions almost certainly will. But this class operates under the assumption that you don't know anything. I mean, nothing about the National Electrical Code, because some of you that are watching might not know anything about it, and some of you watching, you might think that you know everything about it, and the fact of the matter is, not everybody, nobody knows everything about it. I certainly don't. But even if you're at a pretty good level of the NEC knowledge, I think you will find something useful out of this class. Just really quickly, let me tell you a little bit about myself. It's funny, I speak for a living, but when it comes to talking about myself, that's when I always clam up and just kind of get stage fright. I hate talking about myself. My name's Ryan Jackson. I'm based out of the Salt Lake City, Utah area. I've been in the trade for about 25 years now. Most of that as an inspector and as an instructor as well. I was an electrician, and then I moved toward inspection. I've always had kind of a passion for the code book, so my passion for the code kind of led me in the direction of enforcing the code and then teaching the code. I've been a seminar instructor since 2002, if I'm not mistaken, and I've written, I think, 11 textbooks on the code. I've been involved in the creation of over 50 books covering the NEC. Most of the stuff on that bookshelf back there, I had my fingers in the pie of either writing it or editing it. My website is right there. My email address, anytime you guys have a question, if you want to reach out to me, feel free to get in touch with me, ryanjackson618@gmail.com. It would be a pleasure to help you out with your code questions. I'm more than happy to help you out if I can. So really quickly, I think it's kind of important to understand the history of the code book and how did we get from this little thing here, the 1897 NEC, all the way up here to the 2020 NEC. It's been a 130 plus year process. The earliest, to my knowledge, set of rules that covers electrical installations was written in 1881, and it was called A Standard for Electric Light, Wires, and Lamps, etc. by the New York Board of Fire Underwriters. It contained 5 major requirements. Conductors had to be insulated. Kind of you talk about taking things for granted. I mean, that might be the most important rule in the entire code, right? Is that conductors actually have to have insulation on them. Conductors must have 50% extra ampacity beyond the load expectation. So if you think we're conservative in the 2020 NEC, fast forward, rewind it back to 1881, we had to figure out what the load was and double it when we sized the ampacity of conductors. We had some securing and supporting requirements, which of course we still have in the code. We had specific requirements for protecting lamps from accidental breakage. And then the one that I found really interesting, and again, there was only 5 rules in the 1881 set of rules. And the 5th one, building disconnecting means located at the point of entrance. And I put that in quotations. It is a quote. And that's a term that we still use in the 2020 NEC. So I remember years ago, I was doing an inspection on a detached garage, right? The guy had a house and they were wiring a detached garage, and it was an electrician that was wiring the garage. And he had entered the garage without a disconnect, and he went like probably 20 feet with SE cable through the studs and then added a panel. And I wrote him up. I said, you have to have a disconnect at the point of entrance to the garage. And he was really standoffish. I mean, he was pretty aggressive, And he was like, "Oh, how long's that been in the code?" I'm like, "No, I know the answer to that one, and you probably don't want to hear it because it's 1897. Yeah, how long has that been in the code? Oh, about 120 years, But maybe buy a code book, you'll read that sometime. So anyway, a building disconnecting means located at the point of entrance. Those are the first 5 things that we could call any sort of rules regulating electrical installations. Now, this is a copy of it. I understand that it's too small to read, but that's the first 5 rules right there. So that document was expanded, and other similar documents were published until 1896. So you had the New York rules, and you had the Philadelphia rules, and you had the Boston rules, right? You had all of these different rules that had similar concepts, but a standard set of requirements was going to be necessary. It's not like electricity was just a fad and was only going to be used in Philly. You know what I mean? We need rules that two-phase power was a fad and is only used in Philly. But electricity, we kind of had a good idea that that was going to be around for a while. So we wanted to create a standard set of rules. And in 1895, there was a committee that was created to create such a standard. And they finished their work in 1897, and they published a document called the National Electrical Code. And that was the first version of the NEC. Now, they made that book in 1897. And then they revised it, I believe, in 1899 and 1900 and 1901 and then 1903. So they revised it every few years. And then in 1911, NFPA became the publisher. And of course, NFPA has been the publisher ever since. Now, this is the 1897 National Electrical Code that you're looking at. I need to give credit to my friend Ray Morris. Ray Morris out of Alabama. He has the most complete collection of National Electrical Code books in the world, even equally as complete as NFPA's, but in better condition. I mean, NFPA is jealous of Ray's collection. So Ray sent me a couple pics of his collection, which is just extraordinary. So this is Ray's 1897 NEC. The predecessor of the NEC was 36 pages long back in 1895. 10 years later, it was 132 pages long. 10 years after that, it was 224 pages. So we made a lot of progress in the early years of the National Electrical Code. So this is the 1905 and this is the 1915. And then these are the codes from 1897 through 1920. So the 1897 code, I have a reprint, was literally smaller than your phone. I mean, it's a tiny little booklet, and it had some rules that are actually still in the code. Disconnects at the point of entrance has always been there. Neat and workmanlike manner has always been there. Of course, ampacities and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. We've built on the 1897. Now, in 1959, the layout and the format that would be recognized by most of today's code users was created. So that's where we got the articles and the sections and the table of contents and the index. If you were to look at code books before 1959, they're recognizable, but it's obvious in 1959 we definitely changed to the edition that we use now. This was 447 pages. And ever since the 1953 edition, the NEC has been updated every 3 years, and yes, that does include the weird little 1971 to 1975 gap, which was in fact 3 years. And I know that sounds like 4, but a lot of people have asked me, like, what happened in 1971 and 75? I mean, was there something? No. Here's what happened. In 68 and 71, the code book was published in 68 and 71. But there's some states like Massachusetts, they adopt it the January that it comes out. So usually it comes out like in September. So what they did in 71 and then in 75 is they just changed the number. Like this, they could have called this the 1974 code. It was published in 1974. They just changed it and said, this is the 75 version. But it's been the same 3-year cycle ever since 1953. Nothing even interesting happened between 71 and 75. They just changed what they call it. They just changed the title. So every 3 years since 1953. And then this is my man Ray's collection, going from 1897 all the way up to the 2020 edition. So that's kind of a quick, dirty, brief history of how we got here. I asked my friend Ray, man, why do you collect code books of all things? Some people collect stamps and coins, and you collect code books. And of course, his answer is,
a man got to have a code.
Man's got to have a code.
A man must have a code. Oh, no doubt.
A man's gotta have a code.
A man's got to have a code.
Man's got to have a code. You gotta have a code. So before we get into this too deeply, a lot of people have asked about an electronic version of the NEC. There is no PDF for the 2020 NEC, and there will not be a PDF created for the 2020 NEC for a couple of different reasons. The main one is piracy. Let's not kid each other. It's theft. You know, you can go online on Amazon, and even though they didn't create a PDF, there were still people that bought the spiral version of the NEC, right? Ripped out the spiral, scanned 800 pages, and saved it as a PDF, or worse still, scanned 800 pages, and then they're printing it themselves and selling it on Amazon for like $25. And it's like, hey, here's a 2020 NEC. Listen, word to the wise, you get what you pay for. If you pay $20 for a code book on Amazon, you're gonna get junk. And I've actually seen some Amazon code books that were reprints from people, illegal copyright violations, that were missing pages, that were missing entire articles, or that had repeat material. I've seen some where like the numbering changed right in the middle of the document. Look, part of being an electrician or a designer and an engineer, an inspector, part of it is having a code book. That's one of your tools. And you can't be cheap when it comes to buying a code book. Just go to NFPA, buy your code book there. But if you want an electronic version, NFPA Link is the only digital option. Currently, it requires internet access, but there's going to be an offline version available seriously any day, right? Sometime in the summer of 2021. I'm going to quickly open up my version of NFPA Link so you can see it if you're not familiar with it. So this is what NFPA Link looks like, and I'll let's do that. So I'll make it bigger here in just one moment. But if you go to NFPA Link, $10 a month per person, and that's for like 1 to 9 users. The prices might change and get lower for more. But it not only gives you the NEC, it gives you from the 2011 to the 2020 NEC, and every single NFPA standard. Now for me, listen, I am never going to spend money on NFPA 99. It's just something I ain't going to do. But I kind of wish I had it. I'm just not going to spend the $60 or the $100 and buy it. But here's the thing, with NFPA Link, I get access to it. I get access to every single NFPA standard for the same $10 a month. So if I want to use the NEC, and look, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I could not possibly care less if you buy NFPA Link. I don't get paid by it. But if I want to use the NEC, I can go in here, and I can scroll down here to Article 230 Services, and here is my digital code book. And one of the things I want to point out is it's not just the NEC, it's the handbook as well. So if you've enjoyed using the NEC handbook, you can still buy the handbook, but NFPA Link has all of that expanded material as well. There are a lot of features that you can do with NFPA Link. And by the way, at the end of the program, maybe I'll hang out and go through some of the stuff that you can do with NFPA Link. There's things like if you're doing a restaurant, you can search and say, okay, occupancy, assembly occupancy, doing a restaurant. Let's see here. I want to know about, I want to know about a commercial kitchen. I can click on commercial kitchen, and it will show me, okay, here's a garbage disposal, here's the dishwasher, receptacles, here's the hood. What's the rules for the hood? Well, it leads me to NFPA 96. Cool. Not a document I would have bought, but it's included with Link, and now I can actually read the requirements for like the Ansel system. So extremely useful document, the NEC Link. So that is your only option when it comes to a digital product. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. Okay, so with that said, let me quickly check the chat board, see how everybody's doing. We got Brian, we got ELC2K, Daniel, Magdalena, I'm sorry if I said that wrong. Mr. G, what up, G? Bill Snyder, how are you? Joe's back. Yeah, who else do we got? We got Troy, very nice. Steve from New York. Yeah, Steve Cavaleris, of course. Steve with Electrical Time, I think. So check out his page. He's got some good material. All right, so getting started, and I say like getting started with the NEC. I'm a big believer in making your book your book. All right? Your book doesn't have to make sense to me. It has to make sense to you. So write in it, tab it, underline it, highlight it. Do everything you have to do to make your book your book. Make it make sense to you. All right? But just be advised, too many tabs is kind of defeats the purpose, right? Like, look at this is my 2005 here. I got stickers on it. I got a Holt sticker, an IEC sticker, an IAI sticker. I even put like a fire stopping sticker. I mean, this was obviously like my little sticker era in my life. And I got tabs everywhere. Now, if I could go back to my 2005, knowing what I know now, I would probably rip half of those tabs out. Because half of them don't meet... Look, I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. I don't care about agricultural buildings. I don't know how close the nearest farm is from me, but it's not very, So I would rip out some of the tabs because not every tab is applicable to me. Make your code book your code book. Highlighting. Nothing wrong with highlighting, but just be careful not to just change the color of your pages. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, like if you highlight the entire page... Did you really highlight anything, or did you just change the page from white to orange? So just be careful with how much you want to highlight. Now, I'm going to quickly grab a couple of code books here. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. I will grab this one and this one and this one from my collection. Those other books, of course, are available in all fine bookstores, by the way. And let's go to my code cam here. Let's take a look at some of these code books. 2002. This is one of my old code books. This is when I first really started getting into the code. I've got yellow highlights. I've got orange highlights. I don't know now if orange meant one thing and yellow meant something else. It might have. I really don't remember. I remember I was teaching a lot of Article 250 back then and a lot of 240 as well. And I've got stuff circled. I've got little notes saying, hey, take a look at 215.10 as well when it comes to 240.13. And I was really geeking out on Article 250. And that's one of the first articles that people tend to really geek out on. And man, I had writing, watch out for this, equipment grounding conductor, this is the first option required. I had all of these little notes to myself. Take a look at this section as well. I've got stuff circled. I've got stuff written inside of my circled and highlighted thing. So make your code book your code book. If you were to pick this up, probably wouldn't make any sense to you. And I don't care because it made sense to me when I needed it to make sense to me, right? A couple other code books I want to share with you really quick. We got the Jackson name on there, but guess what? It's not mine. This is my mom's code book. Look at that, from 1987. So don't know if any of you guys have your mom's code book, but that's kind of a prized possession of mine. I'll show you one more and then we'll keep going. Another prized possession of mine. This one's from 1990. This is from Mike Holt. Mike Holt's original code book, given to me back in 2005 when I first started working with Mike. Now, you want to talk about making your code book your code book. This was the 1990. And I'm sure Holt was going gangbusters in 1990 learning about the code. And you can see this thing is hammered, right? Because he needed to make it his code book. Now, if you were to talk to Mike today, and I know Mike as well as anyone, his code book probably doesn't have any highlights in it. My 2020 doesn't have any highlights in it. Now, why doesn't my 2020 have any highlights? Well, because my 2002 did. Why doesn't Mike have any? Because his 1990 did. I don't need as many highlights now as I used to back then. So when you're first learning, man, make that code book your code book and don't ever throw it away. It's really nice to go back in time and look at how you've progressed and look at what was important to you, as you first came up. I mean, I look at Mike's and it's like you got yellow highlights here, you got kind of green ones with underlines, you got orange ones, you've got annotations, you know. So when you're first learning the code, and even if you're good at the code, make your code book your code book. It's definitely worth doing. All right, so let me switch this back over here. I do need to make one point though, and that is if you're going to be taking a test, find out the rules for where you're testing, because some testing facilities, some states, counties, etc. do not allow any customization of the code book, including tabs. So if you plan on testing under a given code cycle, you might need a pristine code book with no customizations whatsoever. And with that said, you need to get to the point where you're not relying on your customizations. Nothing wrong with having tabs, but don't find yourself at the point where you can only use the code book with your tabs. You know what I mean? So how do you size conductors? Oh, it's this tab right here. Well, you better have a better idea than that, okay? So customize it, but don't get too carried away. So that's getting started. Let's talk about going from getting started to getting frustrated, because that's the next step. You get started, then you get frustrated. And I think all of us are going to agree with that. So let's do a few things. Let's make sure we're using the right words, okay? Slang terms and trademarks are not used in the NEC, and they can't be. We don't say the word Romex in the NEC. We use NM cable. Right now, why don't we use that? Because Romex is a registered trademark. We're not going to use the word Romex because you can't require that you buy Southwire's product, right? Because Southwire owns the trade for Romex, just like wire nuts. You can't say, hey, you have to use wire nuts. Well, wire nuts are a registered trademark of Ideal. We don't use wire nuts. We use wire connectors. We don't use twist lock receptacles. We use locking type receptacles. We don't use 4-square boxes or 1900 boxes. We use a metal outlet box, right? So let's make sure that we're speaking the same language when we're using the code book. How to go from getting better to getting good? Well, have your code book open when you're listening to lectures, when you're in school, when you're watching YouTube videos and similar. Now listen, you guys on the live stream, hopefully you got a code book somewhere close to you. If you don't, that's okay. If you're watching this though, if you're watching this after the live stream, after it's been recorded, stop it right now and get a code book. You will get 100% more value out of this if you have your code book open. So, have your code book open when you're listening to lectures, watching YouTube videos and similar. Learning is not a spectator sport. That's a phrase that I've used for decades. Learning is not a spectator sport. I remember the first time I heard that phrase, and it gave me goosebumps, because it's so true. If you want to get good at tennis, watching Serena Williams, it will help. You'll learn some different things. But if you want to get good at tennis, you got to pick up a racket and a ball and you got to play tennis, right? You're not going to get good by watching people play tennis. You got to play it. And it's the same thing with the code book. You're not going to get good by listening to lectures and watching videos if your face isn't in the book. Learning is not a spectator sport. You got to answer questions, all right? Find as many questions as you possibly can and answer them all. And I'm talking about books, exam prep books, online, forums, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere where people ask questions. Now, you don't even have to blurt out your answer. If you're not comfortable enough or confident enough, or maybe you don't want to engage in the nastiness that is the internet, if you don't want to actually type out your answers, that's okay. You don't have to. But do yourself a favor, look up the answers when people ask questions. The only way you're going to get good at finding material in the code is looking stuff up in the code. So find questions and answer the questions. Find the code sections that address what you did at work that day. Listen, you're riding home from the job site, you and your journeyman, you got a 1-hour drive. You can listen to your journeyman talk about walking to school uphill both ways in the snow with bare feet. If that's what you're into, knock yourself out. Me, I was reading the code book, right? And I don't care what kind of work you do. Maybe you're doing residential work and you were nailing up boxes. Does the code regulate that? Sure. Right? There's box support requirements, 314.23. Find them. Where was I nailing these boxes? Well, like there seemed to be a pattern every 12 feet or so, right? Go to 210.52. Figure out why you nailed those boxes at that location. Find the code sections that address what you did at work that day. So, getting started, getting frustrated, getting good, getting great. How do we make that progression? Once you're a little bit familiar with the code book, use logic to determine which chapter you need to be in, and potentially which article. And as you progress, you might even memorize sections as well. So here's the idea. Make your target smaller, but big enough that you can still hit it. All right, now listen, I like to throw darts. It's one of my favorite things is to go in the basement and just throw darts, right? This is my dartboard, these are my darts. And let me tell you something. The first time you throw darts, right? You go over to your buddy's house, and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna have some darts." You know, maybe had a couple of beers, and it's like, "All right, let's throw darts." You pick up the darts, and you're like, "Watch this. I'm gonna throw these like Roger Clemens, and I'm gonna hit 3 in the bullseye." Right? And then you pick up your first dart and you throw it, and you look at your buddy, and you're like, I got a friend that's a drywall contractor. He can patch that hole for you. Don't worry. But when you first start throwing darts, you don't focus on hitting the bullseye. You focus on not putting holes in your walls. You focus on hitting the board. You know what I mean? You're not just going to pick up a code book and say, "Oh, yes, that's in 450.4a, of course." You're not going to do that, right? You're just trying to hit the board when you first start. So here's a practice thing that I did for my dartboard. Like I said, this is my dartboard. I actually put tape on my darts, on my board. And I said, "Listen, I can't walk up and just bury 3 triple 20s every time I throw darts. Wish I could, but I can't. But you know what I can do? I can get 3 of them inside that little taped off area. And that makes me feel a lot better about myself. When I miss the triple 20, I'm not beating myself up anymore. I'm looking at it and say, "You know what, dude? At least I got all 3 within the tape." And then maybe it gets to a point where you take the tape off, or you make the tape a little bit smaller. You know what I'm saying? So you're not going to walk up and just hit bulls. You need to start making your dartboard targets a little bit smaller. Now, what do I mean by that? The chapters. Memorize the title of the chapters. I don't care if you've been doing this for 5 minutes or 500 years. Memorize the titles of the chapters. You got to know what chapters 1 through 9 covers. So memorize the titles of the chapters and try to figure out which chapter applies before you look something up, okay? If we're talking about transformers, I may not know which article or which section I need to go to, but I know transformers are general equipment. So I at least know that I need to go to chapter 4. Now, in this code book here, I put some little tabs on here, and maybe I'll go back to the code cam here. So I can tell you this. If I know that the answer to my question is in chapter 4, it's somewhere between, it's somewhere between there and there. I know it's in these pages here. Okay, it's in these pages, from there to there. That means I don't have to worry about all this material and all this material. All I have to worry about is this material. When you first pick up a code book, I mean, look, it's overwhelming. It's huge. You know what I mean? The code book is 892 pages. It's huge. If you can rip out 750 of those pages, it's a lot more palatable. You know what I'm saying? So get rid of 8 of the 9 chapters. Get them out of your mind. Figure out what chapter you need to be in first. Okay? That makes your world a lot easier. That makes your darts a lot smaller. So memorize the titles of the chapters. Figure out which chapter applies before you get too far. Removing 8 out of the 9 chapters makes a big, big difference. Okay, so let's memorize the titles of the chapters first. That's something you got to do. Once you want to go from good to great, and depending on how great you want to go, then we can start memorizing other stuff. Maybe you want to start memorizing articles that matter to you. All right? Look, I've never seen an electrolytic cell. Or if I did, I didn't know it, because I don't even know what that is. Okay? So I'm certainly not going to spend any time reading Article 668. All right? It ain't going to happen. There is stuff in Chapter 6 that I don't even know what it is. I'm not going to memorize that stuff, okay? But I'm going to memorize that Article 230 covers services. I'm going to memorize that Article 240 covers overcurrent protection and 250 covers grounding and bonding, because those matter to me. So it all depends on how good you want to get at the code. At a minimum, memorize the chapters. Then if you want to get better, start memorizing some of the different articles that matter to you. But always try to figure out which chapter applies before you look something up, okay? Because you want to make that code book smaller. Move on to perhaps memorizing or at least understanding the parts and sections as you get better. And as you do it, learn to appreciate the logical layout of the parts and sections that the NEC uses. Let me tell you right now, nothing about the code book is random, okay? Nothing. I was teaching this class in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago. I was teaching it to a group of instructors. And before the class, right, I was in line getting some coffee, and one of the instructors came up to me, and he said, man, you know what I hate about the code? And I said, what's that? And he said, I hate how it's not laid out well. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, stop. You can tell me you hate the code. That doesn't bother me a bit. You hate the code, you love the code, that's cool. You're not going to tell me that the NEC is not laid out in a logical manner. That I will not have. Because it is as logical as anything in the world. In fact, it's elegant. And we're going to go over how elegant it is and how it works here in just a minute. So when we look at the structure of the NEC, first thing we have is the front matter. And I'm going to get into that actually last because it's not that interesting to too many people. Table of contents, introduction, chapters. I threw definitions under chapters because Article 100 is a chapter, but it kind of is its own little thing. We've got articles, article parts, sections, tables, table notes, figures, exceptions, informational notes, bracketed references, informative annexes, and then lastly we have the index. All right, so that is the structure of the NEC. That's the big portions of the NEC. Quickly, let me take a peek at the chat. All right, so we got Earth Electric saying, hey, Christian, Mike, Matthew, nice. Okay, Troy, 2002 was your first, nice. 93 was my first. Steve, I once made my own tabs for every article, yeah, and my favorite sections and tables, and it was a mess. I suggest you stick with tabs from the same publisher for each code cycle so things are familiar. I don't disagree with that. I love the idea of making your own tabs because then you're doing it, you're thinking. You know what I mean? You're engaged. You're not depending on somebody else. But you're right. That can snowball out of control very, very quickly. Earth just attended the Mike Holt seminar in Orlando. Nice. Yeah, good. Hope Mike's doing well. Chris, for my master's test, they gave me the book I could use. Exactly. Some places you are not allowed to bring your book. Good idea. Good. Reference the dart throwing as a good foreman. Yeah, exactly. Code Cam gets me every time. I know, right? Code Cam seems familiar to Tommy D's cam. Yeah, exactly like Tom's cam. I was blown away when you did Article 210 from front to back from memory. So, I have a lot of the code book memorized. But here's the thing, man. It's not so much that I have it memorized. I just know how it works. I know the structure of it very, very well. And once you understand the structure of it, you can fill in the gaps fairly easily. So, but that's not something that you're going to do overnight. But thank you for the compliment, Bill. I do appreciate that. All right, table of contents includes chapters, articles, and article part numbers. Very useful for large articles with multiple parts, and the poster child for that is Article 680. Article 680, swimming pools, fountains, and similar, I think has 7 parts, and they're all very, very specific. So part 1 is general, part 2 is permanently installed, part 4 is spas and hot break. So using the table of contents here can be very beneficial. Personally, I'm not a big table of contents guy. I think if you want to use the table of contents, that's fine. You have to have a decent amount of knowledge going in. If you're first learning the code, stick to the index, no question. Table of contents as you get a little bit better, but even still, I find myself in the index a lot more than the table of contents. So after the table of contents, we have the introduction, and that would be Article 90. Article 90 is the introduction to the code. It needs to be read in its entirety. How many of you guys have actually read Article 90? A lot of people haven't. It addresses why the code exists, when it applies, how it works, who enforces it, and similar material. All right, so it starts off with a statement about practical safeguarding. It says, listen, the purpose of the code is the practical safeguarding of persons and property from the hazards that arise from the use of electricity. All right, this is an electrical fire, as we can see. This is a rather interesting one. This is a 24-volt lighting fire, 24 volts but 25 amps, so plenty of I squared R current to light a fire. This is the kind of thing that we're trying to prevent in the National Electrical Code, right? If you follow the NEC, you shouldn't have a fire and you shouldn't be shocking people. And those are pretty much the only two things that we really promise with the NEC. Follow the code and it'll be safe. So it's there to provide practical safeguarding. It's not a design specification. It's not an instruction manual for untrained persons. If you are at that point in your career where you think duct taping the track light to the beam is the best way to hang track light, this book's probably not for you. It's probably a little bit too advanced for you. Look, I remember when I first started in the trade, I was 18 years old. I've always loved to read books, and I came up from a family, inside the trade, and my mom told me, listen, if you're an electrician, you got to have a code book. That's part of the deal. So I bought a code book. I didn't know anything about anything, and I just started reading it. I'm like, gonna read the code book. Open it up to page 1 and just started flicking through, and I had no clue what I was reading. And it was a total and complete waste of time because I wasn't ready. I was an untrained person. You have to at least have some semblance of understanding of electricity theory and the trade itself before you get into the code book. The code book's not your first book on your learning adventure, okay? You need to get some fundamentals down first. Complying with the code will result in a safe installation. It might not be efficient, convenient, or adequate for good service or for future expansion. So this is the only promise we make. Complying with the code will result in a safe installation. What it actually says is it should be essentially free from hazard. It's not even ever going to be completely free from hazard, but it should be essentially free from hazard. But might not be efficient or convenient or adequate. So I was at this meeting here when I took this picture. There were not enough receptacles in the room, and we ended up daisy chaining all of these relocatable power taps together. And, was that efficient or convenient or good? No. Did anybody die? No. So this did satisfy the code, right? The installation, the code was complied with, but it wasn't efficient or convenient or adequate for good service. So all we're saying is, look, follow the code. You're not going to kill anybody. You're not going to light a building on fire. Now, what does the code cover? And by the way, I'm not going to go through all of Article 90. I have a video on my YouTube channel that's like an hour plus just on 90, and I recommend you watch it. I think it's definitely good material. So 90.2a tells us what the code covers. When do I actually read the code? This is important that you know what the code covers. So the code covers the installation and removal of conductors and equipment, including signaling, control, fire alarm, communications, and optical fiber. In my opinion, the most important single word in the code book is in this section, and that word is installation. It's an installation standard. It doesn't cover usage. It doesn't cover maintenance. Do you have to rewire your house every 3 years when a new code comes out and a new code gets adopted? No, of course not. Why not? Because the code covers the installation. When you install something, you need to comply with the NEC, right? Give you another example. Article 400 covers cords, and it says, listen, you're not allowed to have a cord go through a doorway. Okay, so when I vacuum my house, that means that when I vacuum my hallway, I got to plug it in the hallway. Right? And then when I do my bedroom, I got to unplug it and make sure it's plugged in my bedroom because I don't want that cord going through a doorway. Is that right? Well, no. You don't read the code book when you're vacuuming the floor because you're not making an installation, right? The code covers installations. That's what it covers. Installations where? Well, pretty much everywhere. Public and private premises, including buildings, structures, mobile homes, RVs, floating buildings. It pretty much covers it everywhere. However, 90.2b tells us when it does not apply. We don't cover installations in ships and watercraft. That's the business of the Coast Guard. We don't cover railway rolling stock. The moving part of the train is not covered in the NEC. The subway itself, right, the lighting down there, that's covered by the NEC. But the train itself is not. Aircraft, automotive vehicles. Hey, a friend of mine called me up a couple years ago. Said, Ryan, my neighbor has a taco truck, wants me to change an outlet in it. Does it need GFCI? And I I was frozen. I was like, oh my God, that might be the hardest question I've ever been asked in my life. And I'm starting to think like Article 551 covers RVs, but it's not an RV. And then it clicked with me. Like, go back to the scope. The hardest questions that you get are answered in definitions and scopes. This time it was the scope of the whole code. What does the code cover? Everything. What does it not cover? Doesn't cover vehicles. So I called him back and I said, hey, listen, I have no idea. I don't know if you need GFCI protection or not because it's not an NEC issue. The NEC doesn't regulate a taco truck. The NEC also doesn't regulate installations under the exclusive control of an electric utility for service drops, service lateral, or associated metering. This is probably a service drop. It's utility wire. It's not regulated by the code. How high above the roof does it have to be? I have no idea. It's not in the code. It's in a different book. It's in a book called the National Electrical Safety Code. The NEC does not cover that. It also doesn't cover installations by the utility for communications, metering, generation, control, transformation, transmission, energy storage, or distribution of power that's installed on utility-owned or leased property. This is at a power station where I consult every year. And let me tell you, the first time you see a transformer with that many numbers, you really don't even understand what you're reading. You read 968,800 kVA. And you're like, is there a decimal? No. That's 1 billion watts. Yeah, the NEC doesn't cover that, fortunately. Right? That's not what the NEC was written to cover. So we don't cover utility stuff that's on their own property or if it's a service lateral or a service drop or metering equipment. Now, we do cover, when I teach at this facility, they have a big training room. Looks like just a regular office, 277 volt lighting, 120 volt receptacles. The NEC covers that. Yeah. It just doesn't cover this part of the facility, right? Where they actually create the power and transform it and transmit it and distribute it. So the NEC applies to utilities, just not certain portions of the utilities. All right, let's get into the chapters. Chapters are the largest subdivision of content in the NEC. This is important that you realize how they work. Chapters 1 through 4 apply generally. Chapters 5 through 7 supplement or modify the general rules in chapters 1 through 4, and we'll do an example of that here in a minute. Chapter 8 is its own little code book. Nothing in chapters 1 through 7 applies to chapter 8 unless chapter 8 refers back to it. All right, so chapter 8 is its own little code book. Chapter 9 is just tables, and they're applicable as referenced. Chapter 9 tables, conduit fill, things like that, you don't have to go to them too terribly often. So, 90.3 is the code section that tells us what I just read. Chapter 1 is general. Chapter 2, wiring and protection. Chapter 3, wiring methods and materials. Chapter 4, equipment for general use. Regular equipment, right? Lights, switches, receptacles, transformers, motors, appliances, regular equipment. Chapter 4 applies all the time, unless modified in 5 through 7. Chapter 5, special occupancies, so special places. Chapter 6, special equipment. Chapter 4 covers normal equipment. Chapter 6 covers weird equipment. Let me ask you a question. Where are you going to find the rules for pipe organs? Anybody here ever even seen one? No, because they're not equipment for general use. They're special equipment. They're weird stuff, right? So chapter 4, regular stuff. Chapter 6, weird stuff. Remember that, remember it well. Chapter 7 is special conditions, and what a special condition is starting to become a little bit more gray in the code, I'll be honest. Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, there's a weird little gray line somewhere. So Chapter 7 includes things like emergency power, legally required standby systems, and optional standby systems, so backup power. Covers energy storage. It covers DC microgrids. A lot of the alternative energy stuff is in Chapter 7 or the very back of Chapter 6, like solar. Chapter 7 also covers remote control and power limited circuits. Article 725 covers fire alarm systems, and it covers optical fiber cable. So special conditions, maybe not the best title, but you got to understand what's in Chapter 7. Chapter 8 is communications equipment, or communications systems. You have Articles 800, 805, 810, 820, 830, 840. So 800 is the general requirements for Chapter 8. 805 is mainly telephone. 810 is going to be satellite dishes and antennas. 820 is coaxial cable. And then 830 and 840 are broadband powered systems, but to be honest, they very seldom apply. And then, of course, you got the Chapter 9 tables. All right, so let's do some examples here together. You don't necessarily have to write down your answer, but let's just work these out. Which chapter provides the rules for working space around all equipment? If we know the titles of the chapters, right, we should be able to figure this out. Which chapter provides the rules for conductor terminations? Those rules are about as general as they get, right? That's going to be Chapter 1. Which chapter provides the rules for overcurrent protection? Which chapter provides the rules for branch circuits, feeders, and services? Well, that's not general. That's pretty specific. It's not wiring methods like EMT and PVC. It's not equipment. It's wiring and protection, right? So that's going to be Chapter 2. What about NM cable, MC cable, EMT? Well, those are wiring methods, right? Different ways of wiring. So that's going to be in Chapter 3. Which chapter has switches and appliances? Well, that's regular equipment, right? So that's going to be Chapter 4. How about hospitals, marinas, boatyards, and similar? Well, those are all specific places. They're special occupancies. So that's going to be Chapter 5. If your question is specific to a unique place, it's probably Chapter 5. Now, let's remember one more time how Chapters 5, 6, and 7 work. Chapters 1 through 4 apply to everything, right? Chapters 5, 6, and 7, they supplement or modify those rules in Chapters 5, 6, and 7. So if I were to ask you, at what spacings does your conduit have to be secured and supported in a hospital? That's just the general rules. That's just Chapter 1 through 4. Nothing in Chapter 5 modifies how you strap your pipe, right? So if I asked you, can you use conduit as an equipment grounding conductor in a hospital? Well, that might be a different story. We might have some specific modifications in Chapter 4. Let's do a quick example. Which chapter addresses GFCI protection for outdoor receptacles? Well, the answer to that is Chapter 2. That's found in 210.8. Which chapter addresses GFCI protection for outdoor receptacles at an RV park? Well, that's going to be Chapter 5, right, in 555.71. 555? 551. Watch this little magic wand that's going to happen here. As I clearly said, that's going to be 551. Let me get my thing back up here. And in fact, this will be a good chance. Let's compare 551 and 210.8. Let's see if we got any chatting happening here. Not an installation manual. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Rosanna, Corey. The Metro in DC. Mike, that's exactly where I took that picture. Mike, by the way, that's what all of my vacation pictures look like, right? Is like, once in a while, I'll look at my pictures and it's like, oh, my kids are in it. Why are they here? You're standing right in front of the transformer. Move, you know. How important is it to have the most recent edition when taking the exam? I love that question, Joe. How important is it to have the most recent version of the code? Let me ask you, how important is the test? Is this test important to you? Well, then you probably want to give yourself the best chance to pass it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if I'm taking a test and I don't really care if I pass the test, I'll take my 1986 code. I don't care, right? Because I don't care if I pass it. But if passing the test is important to me, I'm going to give myself the best chance to pass the test, right? I wouldn't walk into the test center with the 2020 code book and half the pages missing, right? I'm going to go in there giving myself the best chance possible to pass the test. So how important is it? I think it's critical. If you want to pass the test, you need to give yourself the best chance. So yeah, have the book that the test is based on, for sure. Taco truck is a mobile restaurant. Well, it's a vehicle. You know, it's a vehicle, so it's not covered. Read the scope. Yeah, that's why an RV is covered. I understand why an RV is covered, but a taco truck is not an RV. It's, definitely important. Yeah, exactly, Corey. Generators are covered if it's mobile, but temporary connected code requirements, common sense. Yeah, we got. It's an automobile as a cop out. Well, look, man, 90.2b says the code does not cover vehicles. Sorry, 90.2b. All right, when will we see the release of the 2023? Probably in September of 2022. That's usually when it comes out. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look over here, and I'm going to break out link. By the way, here's a little tip for you. Use Control Plus, and that'll make your screen bigger when you're using the internet. So let's take a look at 210.8 for GFCIs. 210.8b gives us the general requirements for GFCIs in other than dwelling units. And I'm going to scroll on down here, and it says all 125 through 250 volt receptacles ... must have GFCI. I'm going to move this to the side. I'm going to say open that in a reference panel, and that's going to push it over to the side. And I'm going to go back to chapter 5, and I'm going to go to the RV park requirements, which are 551. And I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to look at which part I'm in. I'm going to go to RV Parks, 551.71, and scroll on down. Here's an example of Chapter 5, modifying Chapter 2. Chapter 2 says what? All 125 through 250 volt receptacles supplied by a branch circuit rated 150 volts less to ground, 50 amps and less, must be GFCI protected if they're outdoors. So that would mean all of them in an RV park, right? But if I read specifically for an RV park, it says GFCI protection must be provided in accordance with 210.8b, but if I keep reading, it says GFCI protection is not required for other than 125 volt 15 and 20 amp receptacles at the RV site equipment. Okay, so that's kind of important that I know that, right? So reading that, we realize that 551 modifies Chapter 2, and that's exactly the way the codebook is supposed to work, right? Chapter 5, 6, and 7 modifies Chapters 1 through 4. Which chapter has the rules for fire pumps and swimming pools? Well, those are special equipment, so that's going to be Chapter 6. Emergency systems, control wiring, that's special condition, so that's going to be Chapter 7. How about telephone wiring and coaxial cables? Well, that's Chapter 8, right? So there you go. That's why I think it's worth memorizing the chapters. One more time, how does Chapter 8 work? Chapter 8 is its own little code book. Nothing in chapters 1 through 4 applies to Chapter 8 unless Chapter 8 says it does. So here's a little weird example for you. Which chapter addresses working space for electrical equipment? Well, Chapter 1, right? 110.26. That's a general requirement. Which chapter addresses working space for a 24 volt fire alarm control panel? Chapter 7 covers fire alarm, and Chapter 7 could modify Chapter 1, right? It could say in Chapter 7, you don't need working space in front of a fire alarm control panel. It doesn't say that, though, so Chapter 1 applies, right? You still need 3 feet in front of a fire alarm control panel, even a 24 volt fire alarm control panel. Let's take this one step further. Which chapter addresses working space for communications equipment, like a telephone punch-down board? That's going to be Chapter 8. Now, here's the thing. Chapter 8 does not refer me back to 110.26. So there are no working space requirements for a telephone punch-down board, even though a telephone operates at 48 volts and around 100 when it's ringing, right? By the way, how many of you guys besides me stripped the phone wire with your teeth, not knowing that it was on? So you don't need working space in front of the telephone board because 110.26 does not apply to Chapter 8. Nothing in Chapters 1 through 7 applies to Chapter 8 unless Chapter 8 says so. All right, so be careful with Chapter 8. Definitions. Article 100 has the definitions of terms that are used in more than one article, usually. Terms used in only one article are defined in that article, usually. Article 100 contains 3 parts, and all of this is going to change in the 2023 edition of the code. All right, so I know I kind of went through that quickly, but in the 2023 code, Article 100 will contain every definition found in the NEC, and it will only contain 1 part, and all 820 definitions in the National Electrical Code will all be in Article 100. Now, a lot of people are happy about that. A lot of people, like myself, think it's a terrible change. I am not looking forward to this at all. I think this is not only a mistake, I think it's a bad mistake. But it is what it is. So today, if I have a term that's used in more than one article, ampacity, right? I use ampacity all over the code book. Then I define it in Article 100. But if I have a term I only use in one article, like, supply side bonding jumper, I'm going to define that in Article 250. In fact, they might even have moved that one. If I only use a term in one article, though, I define it in that article. Usually, but not always. It's inconsistent, and that's frustrating for sure. Each Article 100 definition right now is followed by a parenthetical reference such as CMP-2. Now, that reference indicates that the code-making panel number 2 has purview over the definition. That means nothing to 99% of us. All right, so who has the definition for conductor? Panel 6. As of this writing, the 2023 will also have a parenthetical reference to make code users aware of which article the definition applies to, if it only applies to just one article. So here's what the 2023 is going to look like. All right, we've got system bonding jumper, and it says, that's the connection, ... code making panel 5. That definition applies throughout the NEC. So we apply it, so it's here in Article 100. Border light. Now that's a kind of a weird definition. Code making panel 15 has it. And what about bottom shield type FCC? Look, I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't even know what that is. I have no clue what that means, because it's only used in Article 324. So you can see how the 2023 code is going to work in that regard. A lot of people are saying, well, that's going to really add for usability. And I understand why a person would take that approach. Here's the way I would answer that. There are definitions that you probably don't want in Article 100. If just really quickly, if I go to 393.2, 393 is the article that applies to suspended ceiling systems that are energized, right? When I energize the ceiling grid. So we have definitions for low voltage suspended ceiling power distribution systems, like bus bar. I'll tell you right now, I don't want that definition in Article 100. Do you? Because when I read the definition of a bus bar, I'm not thinking about a low voltage suspended power ceiling distribution system. I'm thinking of what we all know and love as a bus bar or a connector. I don't want the word connector in Article 100 if it's talking about some weird low voltage suspended ceiling power distribution thing. Connector, grid, power supply. You want the definition of power supply in Article 100 if it only refers to this little suspended ceiling grid thing? Personally, I don't. If you do, that's totally cool. That's your opinion. But in my opinion, the 2023 kind of made a mistake as far as the definitions go. But that that ship has sailed. That's pretty much what we're going to have in the 2023. Article 100 does not contain definitions of commonly used terms unless the NEC uses that term in a way that's inconsistent with the typical dictionary definition. So maybe the best and most obvious example is exposed. The NEC's meaning of exposed is different than the typical definition, so it's defined here in the NEC. Now, for all you geeks out there, like me, for terms that are not defined, which dictionary do you use? Well, you're supposed to use Webster's Collegiate Dictionary 11th edition. All right, that's according to NFPA. So when I look at the definition of exposed in Webster's, it's open to view. When I look at the NEC definition, it's on or attached to the surface or behind panels that are designed to allow access. Okay, so the wiring above a suspended ceiling certainly is not exposed as it relates to Webster's definition. But as it relates to the NEC, wiring above a suspended ceiling is behind a panel that's designed to allow access. So that's exposed, right? So that's where we define terms that you might not think we need a definition for. Everybody knows what exposed is. Well, we use it differently here in the NEC. Now, as I mentioned, terms used in more than one article are usually defined in 100. Definitions are also found in the .2 section of some articles, and that's going to change in the 2023. Part 1 of Article 100 contains terms used throughout the code. Part 2 is for over 1,000 volts. There's only like 10 definitions. And then Part 3 is for hazardous locations. If you're looking for the definition of explosion proof, for example, you'd want to be in Part 3 of Article 100. Again, in the 2023, it'll just be one part of Article 100, and it'll contain 820 definitions. All right, let's get into articles. Before I do, chat. Definitions changing. When will we see? Yep. Our definitions mostly supported by a common dictionary. Yep, Webster's 11th Collegiate. Chris, you don't like the change? I hate it. There are some definitions in table notes. Will those be moved? Now that's an interesting question, PR. I'm thinking you're probably talking about 430.22e that talks about like continuous duty, things like that. I don't believe those will be moved. Yeah, definitions will get very busy very fast. That's my concern. Do you know if any definitions are being eliminated? Probably. Almost certainly. There's usually, we almost always get rid of definitions in the NEC. We add them, we get rid of them. So yeah, do I know specifically which ones? I don't off the top of my head. Okay, so articles, other than chapters, articles are the largest groups of information. They are whole numbers. Article 110. And they never contain a decimal, though there is no Article 110.26. There is no Article 210.8. Okay, articles are whole numbers. They never contain a decimal. Articles are grouped logically within the chapters. All right, you guys are going to dig this. All right, so get your geekdom out, get your propeller hat, put it on, right, because we're going to go right down the rabbit hole. This is Chapter 3. How is Chapter 3 arranged? Let's go with the wiring methods, okay, starting at Article 320. 320 through 340 covers cables, and they're arranged alphabetically. I don't have everything in Chapter 3 memorized, but I don't have to. I memorized 320 AC cable, and I memorized 330 MC cable. I know NM cable, Romex, that's Article 334, and I know that UF cable is 340. And I can fill in the gaps if I need to. If somebody says, hey, which article covers mineral insulated cable? I know it's a cable, so it's between 320 and 340. I know the alphabet. I know MC cable is 330, and NM cable is 334, so I'm going to go ahead and say that MI cable is 332. Right? So there you go. You don't have to memorize everything, but the more you have memorized, the more the rest of it makes sense as well. So 320 to 340 are your cables. They're arranged alphabetically. By the way, you can do this with every chapter. Go into Chapter 4, right? 400 and 402 are wires and cables. 404 to 411 really is just the most basic fundamental stuff. Switches, receptacles, panels, lights, appliances, 430, 440, 445, 450, and 455 are all wound equipment, right? Motors, air conditioners, transformers, phase converters, they're all wound. So all of this stuff is very logical. If you want to know just how incredibly, ridiculously logical and precise it is, you need not go any farther than the circular raceways. Those come next. 342 to 362 are your circular raceways. Conduits come first, then tubings. So we've got IMC, RMC, FMC. Why is EMT all the way down there? Because it's not a conduit. It's a tubing, right? Electrical metallic tubing, as opposed to intermediate metal conduit. Conduits come first, tubings come second. Inside of those little subsets, we do the metal variety first and the non-metallic variety second. Metal, 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 metal. Not metal, not metal, not metal, right? Inside of that little subset, we do the non-flexible first and the flexible second. So, We've got our conduits here. We've got our metal conduits from 342 to 350. We have the non-flexible ones, 342 and 344. We have the flexible ones, 348 and 350. And that's how it works throughout there. And then if you want to go even smaller, we do that alphabetically. Why is intermediate metal conduit before rigid metal conduit? Because I comes before R, right? So that's how we do the circular raceways. Then we have our non-circular raceways and similar wiring methods, 366 through 390. That's your weird raceways, right? So gutters, busways, cable bus, wireways, multi-outlet assembly. And then we have open wiring, cable trays, knob and tube, messenger supported, open wiring, outdoor overhead conductors. Open wiring is the last part of chapter 3. And again, you can do that in every chapter of the NEC. You can figure out the logical part. You start in chapter 5. The first 500 through 516 are hazardous because of materials, right? Hazardous locations. 517, 518, hospitals, amusement parks, assembly occupancy, those are hazardous because of the amount of people that are there. So all of it is very logical. And the more time you spend, the more you'll see those consistencies. All articles begin with a scope, and you always have to read the scope. Let me give you a great example, and this happened to me. I know this scope very well because I got this one wrong, several years ago. Guy calls me up, says, Ryan, I'm wiring an x-ray machine in a dental office. What's the rules? And I was driving, and I'm like, hang on a second. I pulled over, and I reach behind me, grab my code book. I'm like, x-ray, that's chapter 6. And I figured out, okay, it's 660. Read article 660, and I give him the answer, right? Hang up the phone, and then I stopped myself, fortunately. I stopped myself, and I said, so Ryan, maybe you should go ahead and follow your own rules and read the scope. And I did, because I'm like, look, I'm not an expert in x-rays. Nobody does x-rays all day, every day. So I go back and I read the scope. 660.1 says this article covers all x-ray equipment at any frequency or voltage for industrial or other non-medical or non-dental use. X-ray machine in the dental office. Caller ID. Okay, calling you back. Sorry. Yeah, I was wrong. It's actually 517 and the answer was different. So yeah, read the scope of the article. You gotta be in the right article. Article parts. Some articles, especially large ones, have parts. Smaller articles often don't have any parts. Being in the right article and the wrong part is a very easy mistake, especially if you're using an electronic version of the code. Listen, electronic versions of the code are great, but you can get lazy with it, okay? When you search something and you're like, oh, there it is, and you type in the answer, that's it right there. Okay, well, make sure not just that you're in the right article, but that you're in the right part of the article, because the answers are going to change depending on which part of the article you're in. Critically important. Now, how do the parts of the article work? This is something that is really important and quite frankly, is really frustrating. And I say that as an experienced code guy. The article's scope, or the first section of a given part, will cover how the individual parts apply. Let me explain what I mean here. If I go to Article 250, Article 250 I think has 11 parts. Maybe it's 12. I think it's 11. Article 250, Part 1, scope, doesn't really tell me. It just says, hey man, this is what Article 250 covers. Okay, cool. So if I'm doing grounding and bonding for over 1,000 volts, there is a particular part of Article 250, and that happens to be Part 10. So I go to Part 10, groundings of systems and circuits over 1,000 volts. And I read it. It says, look, for systems over 1,000 volts, if they're a grounded system, they must comply with all applicable requirements of 250.1 through 250.178 and 182 through 194, which is this part. And here's the key. 250.182 through 194 supplement and modify the rest of Article 250. That's imperative. I have to know that, right? Listen, if you're doing grounding and bonding for over 1,000 volts, you have to read all of Article 250. All of it. and allow Part 10 to modify the rest of the article. Let's compare that to Article 240. Article 240, overcurrent protection. Parts 1 through 7 of this article provide the general requirements for overcurrent protection and overcurrent protection devices not more than 1,000 volts nominal. Part 1 through 7, 1,000 volts and less. Part 8 covers overcurrent devices for supervised industrial locations operating not more than 1,000 volts. Part 9 covers over 1,000 volts. Okay, let's go to Part 9. I go to Part 9, it doesn't really tell me anything. So, question for you. I got a 4160 volt circuit breaker. I got a 12,470 volt system. Fuse. Do I have to read parts 1 through 8? No. Nothing in parts 1 through 8 applies to Part 9. So it works the total opposite of Article 250. In Article 250, you got to read the whole article and let the over 1,000 volt stuff modify what you just read. In Article 240, you don't even read 95% of the article. You just read Part 9. So it's imperative to know what part you're in, but also know how the parts work together in the article. If I go to Article 680, man, this is the poster child of how to make sure you're in the right article, right? If I go to Part 4, I'm wiring a hot tub, it says, listen, installation at spas and hot tubs must comply with Part 1 and Part 4. Okay, so that's general, and Part 4, which is this article. Okay, cool. What if I'm doing a hydro massage bathtub like you might have in your master bedroom, in your master bathroom? Well, hydro massage bathtubs must comply with Part 7. They don't have to comply with the other parts of this article. I better know that, right? Do I have disconnecting requirements and grounding and bonding things? Well, all I have to do is read Part 7. So you've got to know how the part works within the article and know which part you're in. Article 760 has a few different parts. Part 2 is for non-power limited fire alarm, like a 120 volt fire alarm system. Part 3 is for low voltage fire alarm. The rules are going to be different, obviously, so we need to make sure we're in the right part. Now, the 1,000 volts and less parts are usually found before the higher voltage parts. That's not always the case, but it almost always is the case. So, for example, where do you find the minimum cover or burial depth requirements for a 4160 volt circuit? Well, go to Chapter 3, Article 300, and I've got general requirements in Part 1. Part 2 is over 1,000 volts. So if I was, and this is where the more you know about the code, to a certain point, the worse chance you're going to have of getting it right. Because if you really know the code, and you're like 300.5. 300.5 is the burial depth requirements, and you just flip there and you read it and you go. Well, guess what? Even the title says 300.5 is 0 to 1,000 volts. You need to be in 300.50 if you're over 1,000 volts. Okay? So make sure you're in the right part of the article. Another example. What are the bending radius requirements for individual conductors? Not a cable assembly like MC cable or NM cable, but individual THHN conductors. And does this apply regardless of voltage? Well, here's the mistake people make, and I've been in this argument a million times. They go to 300.34 because it says conductor bending radius, right? If you were looking this up on an electronic version, you would hit the search button, type in radius, right? And then your search results would come up and it would be like MC cable, NM cable, UF cable, MI cable, and then you'd find conductors. And you're like, oh, there it is right there. Conductor bending radius, it's in 300.34, and the answer is 12 times for this and 7 times for that. Okay, stop. Time out. Move your eyes up. You're in Part 2. That's for over 1,000 volts, right? There is no bending radius requirement for individual conductors that are less than 1,000 volts. Okay, it's only for 1,000 volts and greater. All right, so we know what the parts are. We know how the parts work. Let's get into sections. A section is the basic unit of an article, like section 300.21 or 210.52. Referring to a section as an article, like saying article 210.52, is not only incorrect, but could have unintended consequences as well. Listen, I'm not the codebook police. If I hear you say, article 110.20, I'm not going to call you an idiot. I'm not. A lot of people mistakenly say article 210.52 and article 210.8. But listen, it's wrong. And especially if you teach the code, I think you need to teach it correctly. You know what I mean? So let's say section and not article. But that could have ramifications. Let's look at this, 210.8, GFCIs. GFCI protection must be provided, ... And it says what? For the purposes of this section, when determining the distance from receptacles, the distance is measured as ... What if that said for the purposes of this article? What's the article? The article is 210, right? The section is 210.8. The article is 210. What if it said for the purposes of this article? Well, that would mean that it applies to all of Article 210. 210.52 has the rules for where you need receptacles in your house. If it said for the purposes of this article, when determining the distance from receptacles, the distance is the shortest path a cord would take without going through a wall, floor, ceiling, or fixed barrier, 210.52 would look a lot different, wouldn't it? Your house would look a lot different if it said for the purposes of this article, this is how you measure. Fortunately, it says for the purposes of this section, this is how you measure, and that's the correct usage of the term. So section versus article actually can make a difference. Sections are often broken down into smaller units called subdivisions, although they're also called subsections. The rules for protecting direct buried service conductors, for example, are found in section 300.5, first level subdivision D, second level subdivision 3. Now, listen, even that's too much for me, all right? Most people, me included, most people, everyone, is going to call that section 300.5 D3. Or subsection 300.5 D3. You don't need to call it first level subdivision, second level subdivision, And calling that a section is not going to have any negative consequences, okay? We don't get that deep in the NEC where it says for the purposes of this second level subdivision, we don't do that. You need to know what an article is, you need to know what a section is, okay? But don't worry about breaking down the section any deeper than that. But here's one thing that we do need to be careful on. It is critically important to read the title and the scope of the article, and then ensure that you're in the correct article part. Read the title of the section and the charging language of the section before progressing into the sections and its subdivisions, okay? Reading a rule without that context is a recipe for failure. I don't care if you're reading the code book, or if you're reading a religious book, or just a Stephen King novel. If you open a book and open a random page and just read a sentence, you can't possibly know what that sentence means because you don't have a context for it, right? You have to establish the context for that sentence, and the context is by moving upward from the section to the part, to the article, to the chapter. Okay? Let me give you an example. I'm going to put this, or first let me give you an example of what I was saying. You got to read the section title, spaces about electrical equipment. But read the charging language as well. Now, the charging language, that's just a Ryan term. I don't know. The code doesn't really have a term for this language up here. When I say the charging language, I mean before you get to A. So it says, look, access and working space must be provided and maintained around all electrical equipment to permit ready and safe operation and maintenance of the equipment. That's a rule. That's not just an introduction or superfluous text. That's a requirement, man. You have to have working space around all equipment. And then more specifically, you get into A, and it talks about equipment likely to require examination, adjustment, servicing, or maintenance. But you've got to read that charging statement before you read A or before you read B, right? So make sure you're following and going through the correct progression through the code section. I'm going to give you guys an example, and I want you guys to do this exercise yourselves, okay? And those of you guys that are watching live, I'm gonna step away for like 1 minute and let you guys figure out this answer. You don't need to type yes or no. If you want to, you can. But I really want you to go through this mental exercise because I think it's very much worthwhile, okay? Here's the question. Is a warning ribbon required above an underground raceway with no concrete encasement? The conduit, the raceway, contains service conductors, and it's 24 inches deep, okay? So, do you need a warning ribbon above an underground raceway with service conductors in it? There is no concrete encasement around the raceway, and it's 2 feet deep. Do you need to have concrete encasement? And by the way, I'm going to throw this out here really quick because some of you guys are going to get this wrong. And I think it's important to remember that we learn from failure, not from success. I remember reading that in, and I wrote the quote here. It's from the book Dracula. Like I remember reading that as a young kid, like obsessed with horror. And even as a young dude, I'm like, God, that's a really good statement right there. We learn from failure, not from success. Nothing wrong with failing, man, as long as you learn from it, right? So some of you guys are going to get this question wrong. I guarantee you. And that's fine, because that's how we learn, right? We learn in the classroom. Learning here is better than learning by having an inspection fail or something. So let's learn it here. One more time. Do you need a warning ribbon above your underground raceway that contains service conductors if there's not concrete around the raceway and the raceway is 24 inches deep? Here is the answer. Okay, I'm going to put the answer on the screen and I'm going to wait 1 minute and you guys can tell me the answer, okay? So the answer is ultimately in D3. So I'm going to step away. You guys can answer the question. All right, let's see how you guys did. If you're willing to put yes and no, if not, that's okay too. Let's see here. We've got some comments up here. Good Sana, thanks for, oh, thank you, Scotty. Appreciate you being here, man. All right, so. Hey, Ryan, are you stoked about Iron Maiden's new album? Kidding me? Yeah. They got an Iron Maiden tattoo. What does that tell you? Yes, yes, yes. Yes, okay. At what point, I guess I have to ask you guys, no, you did not hear a beer. You heard a cough drop. Okay, so one of these days, you guys are going to get this question right. So far, nobody has got it correct. Oh, no, John got it right. John got it right. John got it right. No. And why did John get it right? And by the way, I'm not trying to beat you guys up over this, right? This is something, listen, how do I know this so well? Because I got it wrong. Let's look at it one more time. Now, over current protection, over current, da, da, da. Okay, let's look at it one more time here. Where's it at? Right there. What did I have underlined? I have underlined direct buried conductors and cables must comply with D1 through D4. This was a raceway question, right? Okay, then stop reading. Stop reading. It said, if you have a raceway, do you need to do this? Well, D only talks about direct buried cables and conductors. So stop reading. This is not for direct buried, this is only for direct buried conductors and cables. It's not for raceways, right? So you need to make sure you're in the right article. We're in the right article. Part 1, general. It's not over 1,000 volts. 300.5, underground. Good. 300.5, protection from damage. Remember when I said, read the charging language before you get to 1, 2, 3, and 4. Charging language says what? Direct buried conductors and cables must be protected from damage in accordance with 1 through 4. We're not talking about direct buried conductors and cables. We were talking about what? A raceway. So the answer is no. You don't need a ribbon above a raceway. So it's easy. It's so easy to get that one wrong, right? Because you got to train yourself to read the code in the correct context. If I just read the sentence down here in 3, you don't know the context. 3 is within the context of D, direct buried conductors and cables. So let's make sure that we're doing it the right way. And that's one that even experienced code users are going to screw up on. And again, I screwed up on this, several years ago. That's why I know it so well. I sat next to a dude, he's now deceased, but an old friend named Richard Lloyd, a mentor of mine. I had a tremendous amount of respect for Dick Lloyd. I was sitting next to him at a IAI section meeting, and he was preparing to be on a question and answer panel, and he had this question, and he was actually writing his response, and I grabbed his pencil, and I'm like, Dick, stop. I know you're wrong on this one. I know you're wrong because I was wrong. And I pointed that out, and he's like, oh, there you are. So yeah, that doesn't make me a genius or anything. It just means, yeah, I screwed that one up too. Now I know. So read the full context. By the way, when it comes to sections, articles will often use the same. Oh, I gotta make sure nobody's swearing at me here. Let's see. Live chat. Yo, I suck. I saw that. USC, yeah, man, that's an awesome example. Look, it's the best. It's not only an awesome example, it's the best. It is the best example in the entire code book, and I pray they never change it. I hope they never change 300.5 D3, because I have got so much mileage out of that section. So, yeah, don't feel bad if you got that one wrong. All right. Articles will often use the same section structure, parallel sections, whenever possible. So if you go into like the chapter 3 wiring method articles, for example, you're going to see that they all are the exact same scope, definition, uses permitted, uses not permitted, through framing members, in addicts, right? So if I wanted to know what's the, and this could be like a closed book question. What are the securing supporting requirements for type MI cable? Look, I'm just going to tell you, I don't have a lot of experience with MI. So, honestly, I don't know. I don't know what the requirements are. I know how to find them. I know that MI cable falls between Article 320 and 340, right? Because it's a cable. Those are alphabetical. NM cable is 334. MC cable is 330. So I know MI is 332. Securing and supporting, I know, is the .30 section of a Chapter 3 article. So I'm going to look at 332.30. Now, do I have the codebook memorized? No. Nobody has the whole codebook memorized. But I got to it by just understanding the structure of the code, right? So appreciate the parallel numbering that we see, especially in Chapter 3, but throughout the code as well. 700, 701, 702 also enjoy parallel numbering. When it comes to IMC and EMT, you're going to have the same structure as well. All right, moving on to tables. Tables apply only when the code refers to them. A rule has to point to a table before the table is used. All right, don't just jump to a table. The rule has to get you there. The title of the table is the section that refers to it. So, for example, section 310.16 points you to table 310.16. So, for example, how are equipment grounding conductors sized? Not table 250.122. It's section 250.122, right? You read 250.122, and something tells you to go to table 250.122. Cool. But I can't just jump straight into the table. Something has to get me to the table before I jump into it. Table notes are definitely worth talking about. Unlike informational notes, table notes are enforceable, and they are part of the requirements or permissions of the table. All right, so table 250.122, we all know and love table 250.122. How do you size equipment grounding conductors? There's a note down here. You ever read it? It says where necessary to comply with 250.4A5 or B4, the equipment grounding conductor must be sized larger than given in the table. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds on when that might come up, but it's worth noting that the table is not the end of the discussion. There is a note here that says the table might not be adequate. If you're burying some wiring, right, underground minimum depth requirements, minimum cover requirements, and it says, hey, you need to bury this 6 inches or 2 feet or 18 inches. I'm even saying the word bury, and I shouldn't, because the word isn't bury. The word is what? Cover. How much cover is required? Well, what does cover mean? If I got a 4-inch conduit, right, 4-inch PVC, and it needs 18 inches of cover, do I dig an 18-inch trench? Or do I dig 18 plus my 4 inches for conduit, so 22-inch deep? Well, the second one. It better be 22, right? Now, how do I know that? Because of item 1. Cover is defined as the shortest distance between the top surface of the conductor, cable, conduit, or raceway and the top surface of the grade, concrete, or similar cover. So measure from the top of the raceway to final grade, including the asphalt, concrete, whatever goes on top. Item 3. Lesser depths are allowed when cables and conductors rise for terminations or splices. Kind of important that we have that, right? I mean, if you have to have a handhold enclosure, those things are probably going to 90 up into the bottom of the handhold enclosure. We have to allow for that, so we got a table note that allows it. Those of you guys that are instructors or are getting ready to take a test, let me just tell you right now, those of you guys that are instructors, as soon as you see table 220.55, you're reaching for your cross and holy water, and you're like, oh God, not table 2. Yeah, no. 220.55 is brutal. And if you're taking a test, you don't have a chance if you don't read the notes. Not a chance. So you got to read the notes in the tables. Probably the toughest table in the code. Figures. Don't see figures very often, but they're in there. Figures are sometimes used to diagram a large article's contents, like Article 430, or to explain complex requirements or systems like 690.1 or 700.32. Now, figures are usually called out as part of an informational note, and as such, they're not enforceable if they're called out in an informational note. But that's not always how they work. For example, this figure here, which we're all going to agree is very helpful with the definition of a closed closet. Like, if you don't have a visual of the closet, reading the definition doesn't help me. So 410.2 actually says, hey, this is a figure for the definition of a closed closet storage space. That's part of the definition. This is not just informational. That's part of the code. If I compare that to figure 430.1 for motors, this just tells me how the article works. It's just informational. It is incredibly helpful. 430.1 is a wonderful figure, especially when you're first learning Article 430. I mean, it even tells you, like from as you progress through the circuit. Great figure. Same thing with the figures in 690.1 for solar PV systems. They're just informational, but boy, are they helpful if you're not familiar with all the different terms. PV disconnect and the output circuits and the input circuits. I mean, if you're new to PV, you're going to really rely on those figures. Can you get written up because you didn't comply with this figure? Well, no, there's not a rule there. It's just informational, but it is good information. Sometimes we'll even have a figure just to help out with a really hard code section or requirement. This is one they added in the 2020 code, and I think they did a great job. Hey, I'm going to be honest. I guess I didn't understand this before the 2020 code, because when they put this figure in, it changed the way I looked at this section. So it's very helpful. 700.32 talks about selective coordination. It says emergency system overcurrent devices must be selectively coordinated with all supply side overcurrent devices. Okay, so here's my normal source. Here's my emergency source. I've got breakers E and F. I got breakers A and B. I got breakers C and D. Now, D definitely has to coordinate with C and F and E, because that's all on the emergency system. But it took this figure until it dawned on me, and it talks about it. It says, look, man, overcurrent device D has to coordinate with C and F and E. I knew that. But it also has to coordinate with B and A. And I don't know why I didn't grasp that. I should have. I mean, the rule says, look, all supply side devices. Well, A and B are on the supply side of D, but it took that drawing for me to get it through my thick skull. So sometimes the figures aren't really requirements, but they're really useful. You see a figure, there's a reason it's there. Exceptions. Exceptions, of course, are variances from the text of a code section. They can be requirements, so they can be mandatory exceptions, or they can be optional exceptions. And because they can contain requirements, you have to read all the exceptions. If you have a rule and there's an exception, you have to read the exception because it might be a rule. It might not just be a permission, it could be a rule. Now, if we have multiple exceptions, mandatory exceptions have to appear before the permissive exceptions. Now, this is really rare. It doesn't come up often, but it does happen. So here's a great example. 230.24 talks about clearances for overhead conductors. Above roofs, they have to have a clearance of 8 feet above the roof. Fine. What if I have a parking garage, right? What if I have a parking garage and on the roof you can park your car and you can walk around? Well, read exception 1. The area above a roof surface that's subject to pedestrian or vehicular traffic shall have a vertical distance in accordance with subsection B. That's not a permission. That's a requirement, right? That said shall have, not shall be permitted. So you have to read the exceptions. Even if, hey, I don't need to read it. I already meet the general rule. Well, the exceptions might not be giving you something. They might be taking away, right? What the rules giveth, the exceptions taketh away. Down here, exception number 2, shall be permitted to go down to whatever it is, 3 feet, if the slope of the roof is a 412 or shallower. So mandatory and permissive. The mandatory exception is going to be listed first, the permissive exceptions later. But you got to read them because they can contain mandatory text. All right. Informational notes. Nice and easy. Informational notes, not enforceable. They're usually used to explain difficult concepts, provide references to other related material or standards, or provide other similar help. All right, so 210.19, probably the most famous informational note, says that, where's it at? Down here, note number 3. Conductors for branch circuits sized to prevent a voltage drop of XYZ would be a good idea. Look, that's an informational note. That's not a requirement. There is no NEC requirement for voltage drop in a general application. I know some of you are like, what about 695 and 647? I know. There's fire pumps and there's sensitive electronic equipment. But generally speaking, there is no voltage drop requirement for general purpose installations. This is an informational note. You don't have to follow it. Now, there could be an energy code requirement about voltage drop. There is, but not in the NEC. All right, quickly, let me go to the chat. All right, didn't you reference bending radius before to like a golf ball or something? I did, Troy. Yeah, so if you have NM cable, 12.2 or 14.2, what's the bending radius? How tight can you bend this stuff? Well, a golf ball. If you bend it that tight, that's a violation, okay? Because you couldn't put a golf ball in there. But if it's like that or so, that complies. It's the size of a golf ball for 14.2 and 12.2. All right. Bracketed references. Material in brackets is extracted from another NFPA standard like NFPA 20 or NFPA 99. The reason that we show these is because changing a rule with a bracketed reference must usually be done by changing the reference standard. So for example, changing some of the material in Article 517, healthcare, would require changing the healthcare facilities code, NFPA 99, not necessarily the NEC. So 517.30, for example, 2 systems of power. It says, look, let's just say a hospital. You got a hospital, you got to have at least 2 sources of power. That's found in NFPA 99. Now, maybe you look at that and you're like, you know what, that's stupid. We don't need no stinking generators at a hospital. All we need is the electric utility because they're the best, right? Hey, if that's your opinion, cool. Don't try to change the NEC in this section because the people in the NEC are going to look at you and say, hey, that's not even our rule. That rule comes from NFPA 99. We just put it here because you probably want to know about it. Okay, so that's all these bracketed references are. So this is from NFPA 99. This is from NFPA 99. If you get into Article 695 for fire pumps, you'll see a lot of NFPA 20 bracketed references. Informative annexes. Man, we're getting right towards the back of the book. Informative annexes contain unenforceable but useful material. So we've got safety standards, we've got examples of calculations, we have examples of load calculations, certainly useful material. I do want to point out that although an informative annex is not enforceable, some of them are based on enforceable requirements. Annex C, conduit fill, that contains raceway fill tables that are based on code-compliant calculations. I mean, look, the math works. You look at, that's an annex, so it doesn't matter. Well, yeah, but when it says you can put 3 wires in a pipe, it's because they did the math, and this is the answer. So it's not material you should just rip out of your code book. It is useful. Annex J, accessibility, accessible design for people with disabilities. That's not exactly unenforceable. That's based on federal law, right? That if you think it's not enforceable, the Department of Justice is going to have a little surprise for you. So that's very much enforceable. Annex C, I mentioned, incredibly useful. The only thing that's worth pointing out, take a look at the very beginning of Annex C and notice that it has a table of contents. So if you're going to use Annex C, go to the front part of Annex C first. Use that table of contents. Very, very, very useful, very helpful. All right, we've made it to the index. The index is extremely useful for looking up topics. However, sometimes it can lead you down a rabbit hole. So having a general idea of where a requirement should be found is recommended. I said it earlier. You should know at least what chapter you need to be in. Okay, so at least have that much information before you start looking for stuff. So for example, and I know this is small and you can't read it, but it's not intended that you can actually read the words, but find grounded conductor in the index. You go there and it's going to say grounded conductor. C, conductors, comma, grounded. And neutral. Oh, okay. So grounded conductor. Fine. Find neutral conductor. So you're like, hey, okay, I'm not going to fall for that trick again. I'm going to look at conductors first. Conductors. See also cords and fixture wires. Neutral. See neutral. Neutral. See conductors, comma, grounded. Okay, so you can twist yourself around in knots here. You know what I mean? Just don't lose patience. Eventually you'll get there. Listen, some of you guys, David, I know you use the Florida Building Code, which is based on the International Building Code. Those of you guys that are familiar with the building code and mechanical code and plumbing code, let me tell you something. Those indexes are like 3 pages. There's nothing there. They're completely worthless. So if you hate the index in the NEC, it's only because you've never seen the other indexes in the other code books. The index in the NEC is extremely powerful. Another example. The words approved and approval are certainly not limited to these sections. You better have a better idea of what you're looking for than just something that's so general like the word approved. Because looking up too broad of a topic like cables is not helpful. So again, I know you can't read this, but this is cables and this is all of the index results for the word cables. You better have a better idea of what you're searching for than just the word cables. So you need to have more information and have a game plan. All right, so that kind of brings us into how to find things. And let me just make sure I'm caught up here. It looks like brackets mean you need to buy another reference. I think the brackets should be replaced by $signs. That's pretty funny. Now, sales pitch here, buy NFPA link and you get all the standards. I'm the only code guru that covers everything. The other guys stop at certain chapters. Well, I don't cover. I cover almost everything. They're all, look, man. I'm not going to get into pipe organs, but I do try to. And thank you for the compliment, by the way. I do appreciate that. Al Sheldon says doing a great job. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. All right, let's get back to it. How to find stuff. Well, index, table of contents, experience. Index is usually the best and fastest method, depending on what you're trying to find. Table of contents is sometimes the best, but we're all going to agree there's no substitute for experience. The more you find stuff, the better you're going to be at finding stuff. So, there's an old joke, and I had a little cartoon of this earlier, but the musician in New York City finds a guy and he's carrying a guitar, so he asks him, hey, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the guy with the guitar laughs and he goes, you practice. You practice. And it's so true, right? So how do you get good at finding stuff? By finding stuff. That's how you get good at finding stuff. All right, so table of contents versus index. Where can you find the following rule? Chapter, table of contents, index. Let's do an example. I blacked out the answer. This article covers those circuits and parts of electrically operated pipe organs that are employed for the control and the sounding apparatus and keyboards. Okay, so right off the bat, we know that's an article scope, right? Because it says this article covers. So it's a .1 section of some article. Which article? Well, pipe organ article. Let me ask you a question. Is that regular equipment or is that weird equipment? That's weird equipment. So we know we're in chapter 6. I could go to the table of contents and I could use chapter 6 and figure out where the pipe organs are. Or I could go to the index. If I looked up pipe organs, it says see organs, comma, pipe. All right, fine. So I go to organs, pipe, article 650. I have a pretty good idea that article 650, pipe organs, is not 50 pages long. There can't be that much to pipe organs, right? So I'm just going to jump to 650, okay? I'm just going to dive in. Or I could use the table of contents, and I could say, look, I know it's in chapter 6, it has to be. And I could read through there and read the different articles, and there's pipe organs. It's small enough there's not even any parts. So I could just say, okay, 650, and there you go. So 2 ways to find pipe organs. Which article covers coaxial cable? Now, this is a different one. If I use the table of contents, I'm here to tell you, you're never going to find it. Because I would just start reading the article titles, right? Article 820, Community Antenna Television and Radio Distribution Systems. Okay. Would you actually read through the individual parts? I mean, look, if you know the answer is in chapter 8, you're doing better than 90% of the world. But you're still going to have to read every part title if you want to use the table of contents to find coaxial cable. Me, I'm going to the index. Cables, coaxial, article 820. Beautiful. So there you go. I'm an index guy. Let's do some more examples. How do you answer questions? Well, you figure out what you're being asked. I mean, how often do you overthink questions, really? Figure out what the question is actually asking you and what the keywords are. Use the keywords, make an educated guess about where you think the answer should be, at a minimum, which chapter. Listen, if I have a test question and it says, what's 108 times 7? Look, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I know it's not 17 million, okay? I at least have a general idea, okay? And I think it's important that you have a general idea of where something should be in the code before you start digging too deep. So use the keywords. Usually go to the index. If that fails, go to the table of contents next, but you gotta know the chapters if you're gonna use the table of contents. The last case scenario, if you went through the index, you went through the table of contents, you marked it and said, okay, you know what? I'll figure this out later. You went through the rest of your test, and now you're back to that one you marked, and you're like, I don't have a clue. The last scenario is to just go through the various multiple choices and scratch them off individually, right? Eliminate the wrong choices. Now, that's the most time-consuming method, but it's there if you need it. Let's do a question. Figure out what the question's actually asking, what the keywords are. So the depth of the working space for a 12208 volt panel with grounded parts on the other side of the working space is not less than how many inches? Now look, whether you get the question right here today is not the point. How do we get to that answer? What's being asked? Is this question about panel boards? No. The question's about working space, right? So which chapter should we be in? That should be in chapter 1. That's a general rule, right? If the question was about panel boards, we'd be in chapter 4. But it's not. It's a question about working space, so we should be in chapter 1. So the question's about working space. That's a general requirement. Educated guess should tell us chapter 1. An experienced code user might know that chapter 1 only has definitions and general requirements, so maybe we just know right off the bat that it's in Article 110. And if you know that much, maybe you just go to Article 110 and you click through it pretty quick. Or maybe you just go to the index. Working space. Working space about electrical equipment, 110.26. Perfect. There you go. Once we find 110.26, we're not done. We need to go backwards, make sure we're in the right part, right? Because let's go back one slide here. Working space 110.26 and 110.32 through 34. What if I went to 110.32? Do you know what you find in 110.32? You find the same material for over 1,000 volts. So let's move our eyes and make sure we're in the right part before we circle the answer. So there you go, 110.26A1, beautiful thing. Let's do one more. Overcurrent protection for non-motor operated appliances must not exceed X% of the appliance rated current if the overcurrent protection rating is not marked on the appliance and it's rated more than 13.3 amps. All right, so what are they asking? What's this question about? That's a tough one. Are they asking about appliances? Or are they asking about overcurrent protection? You can go either way with that. I mean, it's about overcurrent protection, but it's specifically about appliances. Now, appliances are general equipment, right? That's not weird stuff. That's normal stuff, so Chapter 4. Now, if we're looking for overcurrent protection, because it might just be in Article 240, that's wiring and protection. So, Chapter 2, maybe. Let's get into the index. If I don't already know that the answer is in 422, hey, maybe you've been doing this a long time. You know it's in 422, but you don't know what section. Cool, go to 422. For the rest of us real people, we're going to have to go to the index, right? So, appliances, 422. I can go through appliances, overcurrent protection, 422.11. Cool. Now I can go to 422.11. 422.11. Let's read what part we're in. Want to make sure we're not in some weird over 1,000 volts or something. I'm in part 2. Perfect. Good. What if we went to the index, though, and instead of looking for appliances, we looked for overcurrent protection? Would we be completely screwed? The answer is no. No, we wouldn't. Because if we went to overcurrent protection and we scrolled down, it says appliances, and it tells us 422.11. So we'd be okay either way using the index. But I'm here to tell you, if you went to the index first and you went to appliances in Chapter 4, you're going to be okay. If you use the index and you went to Article 240, you're done. You're never going to find it because it's not in Article 240. So the index I find much more beneficial, especially for an article that has a lot of material. If I have a question about pipe organs, I know that that's only like a couple of paragraphs worth of info. I'm just going to go to Article 650. You know what I mean? I'm not going to try to dissect it down, and I'm just going to go there. But if it's a question about overcurrent protection, you better have a bullseye on your target, right? You can't just go to the whole article and figure it out. All right, let's do a couple together here. And I actually didn't answer these ones myself, but figuring out what the question is really asking. What's the multiplier used for the ampacity of a non-motor generator arc welder with a duty cycle of 70? If we do the code cam, let's see here, non-motor generator arc welder. So the question is about arc welders, right? And it's about multipliers for non-motor generators, duty cycles, arc welders. Let's figure out where arc welders are. I could go to the table of contents. A welder is unusual equipment. So I could go to Chapter 6. And let's see if we can see this thing or not. Might not, it's a little bit blurry. But I can scroll down and I can find that welders are 640, 650, 660. Where are welders? 630, isn't it? Yeah, 630. So welders, 630. And I can go to Article 630. And I'm sure with welders, it's not a huge article. I want to make sure I'm in the right part right off the bat. So the question, ampacity of a non-motor generator arc welder. Okay, let's go back to the code book. If you can see it, not certain that you can. But part 1 is general, part 2 is arc welders. Arc welders. Part 3 is resistance welders. I don't want to be there. I want to be in part 2. So let's make sure we're in the right part first. And then we have what? Non-motor generator, duty cycle. Down here, non-motor generator, duty cycle 70. Answer is 0.84. So we can figure it out that way. So that was me using the table of contents. Now again, a couple of these I haven't really looked at. Service equipment rated 1,000 volts or less must be identified as X for use as service equipment. This is a tougher one. So suitable, allowable, certified, permitted. Well, if you've been playing this game for a while, you might have heard this phrase. There is a phrase that people say called suitable for use as service equipment. So maybe hearing that, you might feel like that's the right answer. But listen, I hear people say wrong answers all the time. And I hear people say slang terms and things that aren't right all the time. So I'm not going to rely on that. It's like, yeah, I've heard suitable. It must be suitable. I'm looking this one up. Where do you think we're going to find this? Service equipment. Well, that's a tough one. What is service equipment? I would probably, if I didn't know for sure what service equipment was, I would probably go to the definitions. And I'd say, what is service equipment? The question is about service equipment. No question about that. That's the question. Service equipment. I don't know what service equipment is. So I need to go to Article 100 and figure out what it is. I go to Article 100. I look up service equipment. And it says, hey, the service equipment is the first place you can shut off the service. Okay. So this is service stuff. So now I know I'm in Article 230, right? Article 230 services, probably an article you ought to have memorized. You know what I mean? You ought to know that Article 230 is services. At a minimum, know that you're in Chapter 2. Maybe go to the table of contents, Chapter 2. You got what? Neutral conductors, branch circuits, feeders, calculations, right? There's not too many articles. Or service equipment. Maybe you go to the index, and we'll do this together with the different camera. So service equipment, and I have no idea if this is going to lead me on a wild goose chase or not. I'm hoping it doesn't. But I'm looking for service equipment, QRS. Service equipment. Okay, so service equipment is here, and it goes all the way down. There's a lot of information about service equipment. Arc flash hazard, definition, disconnecting means, could be disconnecting means, connections, electrically operated, grounded conductor. But here's something that I want you to notice. If you can read the book, and if not, hey, listen, you should have your code book open right now anyway. But if you can notice, all of these sections are right in the same place. 230.82, 81, 94, 75, 64, 77, 70, 70B, 71, 72. Maybe we just go to that part of the code. So we can flip back to 230, 230.70 or so, and look right there. It says service equipment. Perfect. So the question was, service equipment rated X volts or less must be identified as something. And we can search down here, marking, identified, marking, service equipment, 1,000 volts or less must be marked to identify it as what? Suitable for use as service equipment. So there you go. Nice and simple. All right. I'm not sure how many times we want to go through those examples, so I think I'll just kind of end it there. Quickly see if we've got anything in the chat. All right, we got people volunteering. B, definitions. Yep. Part 5, exactly. Yeah, flipping through your code books is exactly why I don't have tabs. Hey, T-Rope, feel ya. I'm the same way. I can't have tabs. Tabs slow me down. But for other people, tabs are a godsend. So make your code book, man. I don't care if you can use my book, right? I want to make sure you can use yours. If tabs help you, get them. For me, I haven't had tabs in my book since 2005 because they slow me down. All right, so with that said, let's quickly cover the front matter in the NEC. So this is the very first stuff that you read when you open the code, like page 1 through page 4 or 5, the front matter. The members of the NEC Correlating Committee and the 18 NEC code-making panels are found here. It's not intended that you can read these, but there's the members of the Correlating Committee. We've got the code-making panels. There are 18 of them for the 2020 code. For the, yes, there were 18 for the 2020 code. No, for the 2023 code. And there were 19 before. For the 2008 code, there were 20. One of them was just for Article 708. Then we had 19 code-making panels. Now we only have 18 because we combined panels 6 and 7, which used to cover conductors in 310 and fixture wires in 402. And we thought, you know what, that's close enough to like Romex and MC cable and MC cable. Let's just merge all those. So now there's 18 code making panels. The makeup of the code making panels is actually discussed in the very back of the code book, past the index. It says, listen, if you're on a code making panel, you have to be one of these types. You have to be a manufacturer or a user or an installer maintainer. You have to represent labor or applied research testing laboratory like UL or Intertech or somebody, FM Labs. Enforcing authority, insurance, consumer, or special experts. So those are the different types of members that create a code making panel. Any classification, and it's important to me that you understand this because there's a huge misconception out there. Any classification, such as manufacturer or labor, can comprise a maximum of 1/3 of the panel's membership. All right, so let's take Code Making Panel 2, for example. Okay, there are multiple manufacturers on Code Making Panel 2, but they don't all manufacture the same stuff. You have circuit breaker manufacturers, you have receptacle manufacturers, and you have manufacturers of luminaires, right? So they don't all make the same stuff. Their interests aren't necessarily aligned. And by the way, when it comes to AFCIs, circuit breakers and receptacle peoples, their interests are not aligned at all. They don't help each other. They usually hurt each other. Okay, so there's all the manufacturers together can make up a maximum of 1/3. And even those manufacturers don't necessarily play well together. Maximum of 1/3. Maximum 1/3 of labor as well. IBEW has a member on every panel. So does IEC. You got union, non-union rep on every panel, right? Now, usually labor, they vote together. The interest of every electrician usually is the same. We all want safety and, we all want a code book that we can read and understand. So it's a maximum of 1/3 of any entity that can comprise the code making panel's membership. And here's the key. A change requires at least 2/3 approval. Don't tell me that the manufacturer owns the code book, because they're a maximum of 1/3 of any given code making panel, and it requires a minimum of 2/3 majority to change the code. So there is no, what would the word be for it? The deck is not stacked, okay, in anyone's favor. So this ensures that a single interest group does not have the ability to stack the deck. Now, anybody other than NFPA staff, there's only about 50 people in the world that cannot make a proposal, and that's NFPA staff. Anybody else can submit material for a code change. You don't even have to be an electrical person. There's a rule for in dwelling units, how high above the kitchen countertop can your receptacles be and still qualify for the kitchen countertop? It used to be 18 inches. Now it's 20 inches. And I'll tell you how that changed. It was an interior decorator out of Montana that submitted the code change. And she's like, listen, I don't know anything about the electrical code or even electricity, but I do know this. The height of a countertop is usually this many inches. And when you buy upper cabinets, they're usually this many inches. And that results in a gap between the two of 20 inches. And because it has to be 18 according to the code, I can't use plug mold on the underside of my upper cabinets and satisfy the code, and that sucks. You should change it. And they did. This person didn't know anything about electricity. She got a code change through. Anybody can submit a code change. So anyone can submit a code change or a public comment. The changes are published in the NEC first draft, then revised via public comments for the second draft. Okay, so we submit our change proposals, which we now call public input. The code making panels vote on, and they publish the results of the votes in what's called the first draft. All right, and you can read the first draft of the code book. In fact, right now, today is August something, 2021. You can read the first draft for the 2023 right now, and you can read it and say, boy, that change sucks. You don't have to like everything the panels do, because you might be right. This change might really suck. You might look at it and say, oh, that's a really stupid change. They didn't think about this. Well, listen, man, the code making panels have a lot on their plate. They're not perfect. So sometimes they'll make a change and they need the public to make a comment. They'll need somebody to say, hey, you're wrong on that. You didn't think about this, this, and this. And sometimes it's like, hey, you wrote this rule that applies to everybody. But you got to understand, my whole world, I do airport runway lighting, and you just ruin my whole life. Because the code making panel guys are like, oh God, I wasn't thinking about that, So we need the public to be involved in the process. Anybody other than NFPA staff can submit a public comment. So they publish a first draft, we make comments, we tell them how terrible the book is, and they change it, right? And then we look at the second draft, and there you go. Now the results of the second draft, that's usually the end of the road, okay? For most code changes. You got the first draft, make comments, second draft, they publish it, that's your code book, for the most part. However, anybody other than NFPA staff can make an appeal to the membership. Maybe you read the first draft and you're like, oh, that sucks. And the second draft, the code making panel says, no, it doesn't. This is a really good rule and we're keeping it that way. Well, your options are not exhausted at that point. You can make an appeal to the membership, and we call those a certified amending motion. And that takes place at the annual technical meeting, or we can also appeal to the Standards Council in accordance with some regulations. And I'm glossing through this a little bit because this is, your eyes might be glossing over as I'm glossing over the material, so I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole. The previous steps cannot be skipped. So in other words, I can't just sit here the whole time, watch the process happen, and then throw a flag at the end and be like, oh, no, I'm making an appeal. You got to follow the whole process here, right? So the appeal is kind of interesting. So the appeal to the technical, to the membership, that happens at the technical meeting. So the way it works, let's do, I'm trying to remember how I have this ordered. In the front matter, it says, hey, this edition of the code was prepared at the June Association technical meeting. It was issued by the Standards Council and ... So it tells you all this. But what's important to understand, and here's where the appeals come in. And to me, I didn't fully understand this, not completely, until the 2020 edition. But I've heard thousands of times that the NEC is a consensus standard. Because, that's a consensus standard. Okay, cool. Well, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? A consensus standard means that the technical committees, right, the code making panels, and NFPA membership made up of anybody, right, whoever pays their dues to NFPA is an NFPA member. The membership and the technical committees have to agree on every word in the book. That's consensus, okay? They have to have a consensus between the two. So you have to have consensus, and that happens at the annual technical meeting. So if there are no appeals, then we automatically have consensus because we've had the chance to review it, right? Hey, we had the first draft, we had the second draft, we've got consensus, we're good to go. But somebody can appeal, and they can appeal and create what's called a certified amending motion. And they can appeal and they can say, hey, you know what? That stupid code making panel, they don't know what they're doing. We, the members, we think that AFCI should be applied throughout the whole house, because that's what happened in 2020. All right, for the 2020 NEC, there was a proposal that said put AFCI throughout the whole house, and the code making panel said, no, not going to do it. And there was a public comment that said, well, you really should. And the code making panel said, no, we shouldn't. We're not putting AFCI through the whole house. And then there was a certified amending motion. And at the technical meeting, a person got up and they said, hey, man, we want AFCI through the whole house. And the membership, right? And you're talking 1,000 people, whoever's at the meeting. 1,000 people all stand up and they're like, yeah, AFCIs, put them everywhere. And that passed. The membership said, we want AFCIs everywhere. Well, guess what? That's not consensus, because the membership and the committee didn't agree. So now, because that appeal went through the process and passed, now it goes back to the code making panel. And the code making panel is looking at a document that says, listen, the membership of NFPA wants AFCIs everywhere. So you need to revisit this. And they did. The code making panel looked at it and said, well, let's talk about this again. And they said, we still don't want them throughout the whole house. So, no, we don't have consensus. What happens when you don't have consensus? If you can't achieve an agreement between the members and the code making panel, then it reverts back to the previous version. Here's something funny. The last time we had consensus on where AFCIs are required was 2014. So that's why we haven't added any locations for AFCIs, because we don't have consensus. The code making panel says, hey, we're happy with what we have. The membership is saying we want more AFCIs, and the code making panel says, no, we have enough of them. So there you go. That's why 210.12a says what it says. Okay, your last effort, and again, I'm glossing over this. Your last effort is to appeal to the Standards Council. They're the, if NFPA has a Supreme Court, it's the Standards Council, okay? So you can appeal to the Standards Council. But the Standards Council usually will defer to the action of the code making panel on technical stuff. Look, the Standards Council, they don't want to hear why you think AFCIs are great or why they're horrible. They're like, listen, you guys talk about all of that. We're here to listen to like legal issues, or if the change creates some sort of an undue hardship. Like there was a change back in, I think it was like 2011 or something, that kind of crept through, and it ultimately would have destroyed the entire industry of busway, like bus or cable bus. The cable bus manufacturers would have went out of business. And it was something that it just kind of slipped through the cracks. And there was a guy, wasn't even a manufacturer, just a code dude. He made an appeal to the Standards Council. He said, hey guys, let me tell you something. If that change goes through, you're wiping out a whole portion of the industry. And that wasn't even discussed. And the Standards Council looked at it and they said, you know what, you're right. That change doesn't pass. So the Standards Council has the final say. But they're not going to get involved in too many things. All right, so Standards Council, they issue the document after all appeals have been heard, exhausted, and addressed. Back to the front matter. We also have tentative interim amendments in the front matter. If we issued a tentative interim amendment, or a TIA, before the publication of the code, then you're going to find the TIA in the front matter. So, taking a look at the 2020 version, it says this code was issued with the following TIAs that impacted these sections here. Okay, so a TIA, a tentative interim amendment, that's something that's used to correct a problem with the code that's considered an emergency. Okay, so maybe the code book gets published, and then somebody reads it and they're like, oh my gosh, if you read that literally, it means you don't have to have circuit breakers anymore. Okay, well, obviously that's an emergency. You know, so if there's like a screw up and it's an emergency, then we go through the process of establishing a TIA. All right. Now, a TIA, tentative interim amendment, occurs between development cycles, although it still has public review. So a TIA requires sponsors. It's a big process. You have to have sponsorship from 2 code making panel members and a 3/4 majority vote from both the code making panel and the correlating committee. TIAs do not get issued unless they are an emergency. So if a TIA survives the process and it gets issued before the book actually gets printed, then they'll include it in the book. Okay? But sometimes we print the book and somebody reads it and they're like, oh, that needs to be fixed. Look, man, the code book's written by humans. It happens. If that happens and they issue a TIA, then you go to NFPA's NEC website and you can find the TIAs there. So here is an example. This is the only one I've ever submitted. This was in the 2017 code for temporary wiring. They made a change in temporary wiring in 2017 that said, hey, you don't need a box or a conduit body or other enclosure for your splices. Right? Temporary wiring you can splice in the open air. Well, I made a TIA. I got with a couple of my guys and I'm like, that used to only apply on construction sites. Right? Right. Well, now it applies to like Christmas tree lots, anywhere where there's temporary. I don't want open splices on the ground in a Christmas tree lot, kids playing with them and everything else. And the guys were like, oh snap, that's an emergency. So that was a TIA, right? And they issued it and they said, on construction sites. That's what we meant. Okay, so that would be an example of a TIA. The last thing, the very last thing, is Errata. If text that the code making panel did not approve is accidentally published, then it's addressed via errata in the next printing of the NEC. There's usually very little errata. Again, that is when they actually print something in the book that was a complete mistake. Not a mistake by the code making panel, but like a mistake by the guy with the typewriter. Like they put something in the book that was not supposed to be in the book. So an example of that, in the 2017 code, if you go to 300.4, take a look at your version of the 2017, you might have this informational note in 300.4. And you might not have that informational note in 300.4 because it wasn't supposed to be there. That was a proposal that failed. And somehow, like, NFPA staff had written it as a pass, and they put it in, and it got published and purchased and everything else, and it was like, guys, that wasn't supposed to be there. So that's going to be an errata item. Considering that we have about 5,000 proposals and 3,000 public comments, we only get like 2 or 3 erratas in the code book. It's pretty impressive. So errata are very rare, but hey, they're there when you need it. So with that said, we made it through the NEC. Any questions? That's where all the hands come flying up, right? But there you go. That is my little spiel on the NEC. I hope you enjoyed it. So back to questions here. Plug mold should be removed from existence. I hate plug mold. All right. How many members are on? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it this way so I can actually read the comments a little bit easier. Let me just bring up YouTube. There we go. Okay. Brackets. Can we email you specific questions? Sure. Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. Great video. Thank you very much. How many members are on a given code making panel? For example, panel 5. Okay, so panel 5 is panel 5 covers Article 250 and 242 for surge protection devices. I think there's like 15 primaries and then 15 alternates. Each member has an alternate in case they get sick or can't make a meeting or whatever. Let's see here. Hates plug molds, that's okay. Is NFPA a revolving door of former industry executives advocating for expensive equipment in the guise of improved safety? Fair question. The answer is no. It's not. I mean, plain and simple, no. It's really not. Another thing that T-Rope does is in the annex for raceways. I'll write on the top of each page, love it. Yeah, right on the top of each page in Annex C, EMT, flexible metal conduit, RMC, whatever. I think that's a great idea, actually. I really don't get AFCIs. We did just fine without them, in my opinion. I might be tattling on myself, but I rarely put them... Don't say that. Well, I mean, here's the thing, man. People said the same thing about GFCIs, you know, and now we look at it, and I think we all agree that GFCIs save lives. And I'm not trying to give you a belt, you know, sell you a bill of goods or anything. If you don't like AFCI, you don't like AFCIs. I think they do prevent fires. To what extent, I don't know. It's hard to prove things that didn't happen. You know what I mean? It's hard to look at it and say, hey, a fire didn't happen right there. Well, yeah, it didn't. Well, is it because of an AFCI or is it because the wiring was perfect? I mean, who knows? So it's tough. Let's see here. Barry, I'm sure you're aware of the TIA regarding a delay in the GFCI requirements for exterior condensing units until 2023. So, yeah, there have been, off the top of my head, there have been 4 attempts at publishing a TIA for outdoor air conditioners for residential, and all of them have failed. There has not been a published TIA. So, and I don't think there will be, by the way. So we'll see what happens. But as of right now, no TIAs. America operates on assigning and denying liability. AFC on paper improves safety and therefore decreases liability for manufacturers. I think it well, I don't know about liability. Maybe it could. It could. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Really appreciate you guys. I probably ought to so you guys can see me. Great video about breaking down the code. Thank you. This is absolutely the best explanation of the code making process. Thank you. Appreciate you. Felix, thank you. Terrific session. Thank you. Will equipment grounding conductors ever be required to be pulled to existing installations to separate buildings? I don't think so. I don't think they will. And that was 250.32b and its exception. I can speak to that because I was the one that got that in the 2008 code. No, I don't think so because, it would be impossible. You'd never be able to end it. As long as it complies with previous versions of the code, then it remains compliant. So usually we don't make you go back in and fix things. Any advice for new trainers of the NEC? Patience. Let's see. Any advice for new people training on the NEC? Pretty much the steps that I walked through on this video. To be honest, Barry says yes, a TIA was issued. Okay, we're gonna check you out, Barry. We're gonna do this right now. Sorry if you answered this, but am I going to upload? Yes, I will upload this video to YouTube. Absolutely. Very enlightening. Thank you. Appreciate that. Last minute tips for that journeyman test. Yeah, study. Make tomorrow your last minute. Do what you always do, man. Go to sleep. Don't drink the night before. Look, I like a beer as much as the next guy. Don't do a test hungover. Eat breakfast, everything else. But if you're looking for last minute tips, boy, that's tough. Hopefully you have it down pretty well before the last minute. How many receptacles are allowed on the 2 small appliance branch circuits in the kitchen? Many as you want. No allowances. How often are live stream videos done? Whenever I feel like doing them, and really it's not that often. I need to do that better, to be honest. I need to do more of them, but I kind of do them whenever I want to. Fake TIAs. We're gonna find out. You're the best. Thank you. Excellent. Email to me. All right. You know what though? Here's the thing. You can email me whatever you want. You can email me anything. Doesn't mean it's true. We're gonna do this the right way. We're gonna go to NFPA's website. Okay. nfpa.org/70. That's how you get there. We're gonna scroll down to next edition, and we're going to look for, or is it this edition? Yeah, we're going to look for this edition. Issued amendments. These are TIAs that made it through the process, okay? These are the only TIAs that have made it through the process. There is a TIA to 725.121. There's a TIA to 210.52, 240.67, 240.87. These ones were issued in December of 2019. These two were issued in April. One was issued in April of 2020. Another one was issued August 11th of 2020. There have not been any TIAs issued in 2021. Now we can scroll through and we can check TIAs that are in the development, in the process. And let's see, if I go all the way down here and I go to Code Making Panel 2, I can look at the ballot results for several TIAs, including ones on this very issue. So let's take a look. This is regarding to 10.8F, which is the section we're talking about, Barry. It went through Code Making Panel 2. So Panel 2 said, is it accurate technically? Yes. 12 people said yes. 1 people said no. Is this an emergency? 12 people said yes, it's an emergency. 1 person said no. Okay, so that means that TIA so far has passed the code making panel. Now it goes to the correlating committee. Okay? And the correlating committee needs to look at it and ask, does this go through does it meet the criteria? So this is the correlating committee right up here. And we can look at what the correlating committee said on the last version of that TIA, which is not that one, but is that one. Is it 1589? Let's see here. Yeah, 210.8. 11 people agreed that there are no correlation issues. 1 person said there is a correlation issue. I would disagree with that, but that's just my opinion. 4 people on the correlating committee said this is an emergency. 8 people said no, it's not. That TIA, Barry, has officially crashed and burned again. It is not issued. So, TIA 1593 was not issued. Just looked at it. TI 1593, we view it. Let's see. 1593. Final ballot. 1593 has passed, but has not been issued by the Standards Council yet. So far, 12 people on the correlating committee agreed, and 11 agreed that it's an emergency, 1 disagreed. So finally, 1593 did pass the correlating committee. It hasn't been issued by the Standards Council yet, from what I can tell. So, 1593 is not issued yet. I think the next time that the Standards Council meets, they will issue it, unless the Standards Council actually disagrees. And I don't know why anyone would disagree on the Standards Council. So the code-making panel 2 cannot issue it. So panel 2 doesn't issue it. It only gets issued by the Standards Council. What do I think about neutrals in every box or fan-rated box? Is that not future use, which the code is not intended for? That's a great question, William. So, neutrals in every box is for the potential future installation of an occupancy sensor or an electronic dimmer. But I personally, I have no issue with that being a requirement. I really don't. Because if we do install one, there's no way to comply. And it's something that the user is going to install without consulting an electrician oftentimes. So you got a switch box and somebody needs an electronic dimmer, they're going to put one in. They're not going to hire an electrician to do it. And if they don't have a neutral there, then that switch is going to put neutral current on the equipment ground, and it could shock somebody. So I really don't have a problem with that. And the future fan box thing, I have the same point of view on that. Is that crystal ball code enforcement? Kind of. Yeah, it is. But really, I know enough electricians that have seen enough ceiling fans that are hanging down by the wires, and like seriously, the only thing holding the fan up is the twist-on wire connectors. It's something that you can, hanging a ceiling fan's not rocket science. Most homeowners can do it. And the homeowners don't know that they need to change the box. So, I think it's a little bit of a stretch in the 2020. I think they went a little bit farther than I would have, but I can see where they were coming from. So, remember to like the program. Oh, thank you, Robert. Robert from Omaha, good to see you, brother. ELC2K, why does a dimmer switch make a tiny buzzing noise? No clue. It's beyond my expertise. I'm just a code nerd. So why things buzz, I don't know. They drink too much. I really don't know. Just the electronics going kind of strange. Hard to say. So, listen, I appreciate everybody coming by. I had a great time. I hope you guys did too. So hopefully we'll see you around. I'll do another one of these days. I need to do them more often. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something out of it. And I hope you guys have a great day. So we'll see you guys down the road. Thanks, everyone. Why does a transformer hop?